because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome, everyone, to Cows in the Field. This is a movie podcast where we talk about the philosophy, cultural themes, and other stuff regarding popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we are joined to talk about The Conversation by my very good and old friend, Robert Pierce.
Hello.
You think we can do this?
Later in the week.
December 2nd, 1 p.m., Parabolic Unit B.
Let me tell you something about Harry Cole. The best, bar none. I'll drink to that.
Best what?
The best bugger on the West Coast.
Look, did you see him? The man with the hearing aid. He's following us all around us.
3 people were murdered.
Had nothing to do with me. I mean, I just turned in the tapes. Bless me, Father, for I've sinned. I've been involved in some work that I think will be used to hurt these 2 young people. No, we're responsible. I'm not responsible. How'd you get this phone number?
We prepare a full dossier on everyone.
It's terrific. The bugger got bugged, huh?
Do you have secrets, Harry? I know you do. Tell me about yourself. Your secrets.
I don't have any secrets.
Don't get involved in this, Mr. Cole. Those tapes are dangerous.
Come on, Harry. Show and tell. How'd you do it?
Why are you asking me all these questions?
So this movie is remarkable in at least the following sense. So Francis Ford Coppola makes The Godfather, and then he makes The Conversation, and then in the same year releases Godfather 2. And I don't know if that's ever happened in film history where somebody has made, first of all, 3 amazing movies in the span of 2 years, but also been up head-to-head against themselves for Best Director at the Academy Awards. Has that ever happened?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm not aware of any other
Not that I
instance
know.
of
I mean, Spielberg's kind of famous for doing 2 in a row, but
Yeah.
it would be like a Jurassic Park Schindler's List, like only like a popcorn
Yeah.
and an Oscar,
Hmm.
you know? So I don't know of anybody else who's been up against themselves. That's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. So we'll be talking about this movie today. But before we get into that, I guess, Robert has been mentioned on this podcast, multiple episodes. And we figured,
infamous.
Yeah, we figured
been invoked.
we should bring him on because the spirit of Robert has been invoked. And so Robert, we met in Santa Rosa. We were talking
Right.
earlier, 17 years ago.
Yeah, 17, 18, whatever it was. So I lived in the Bay for, just shy of 20 years. And I lived in Santa Rosa for a couple of years. And toward the tail end of that, before I moved to San Francisco, I worked at Healdsburg High School and was the manager of a tutorial lab, which you also worked at.
Yeah.
While I was there, I went to school and I tried to work a couple jobs and, sort of figure out what direction my life was going to go in at that point. And it was, I was socially awkward, like in my early 20s. I didn't know anybody. I had moved there from Oregon. I didn't know anybody. And you were literally the one friend I made the whole time I lived there. Shortly after I stopped, we both stopped working at the high school. I moved to San Francisco, and that was kind of all she wrote.
Speaking of San Francisco, so let's get into the movie. So
Right.
here's a quick sort of synopsis of not the whole plot, but just kind of the setup of the plot. So we have a guy played by Gene Hackman. His name is Harry Cole, and he is a professional eavesdropper. So he bugs people And, he's hired by certain clients, he bugs people, and then, gives his clients the recording that they asked for. He's also a very secretive guy. Something we're going to talk a lot about is how he he himself, knowing that he could be easily bugged or listened to at any time, demands and desires a kind of anonymity in his life, and is quite paranoid about being followed or bugged. And he professes ostensibly to not care about the subjects. He's like, it's just a job. I just record and that's that. But he comes over the course of the movie to worry that the people he has been bugging in at the beginning of the movie, their lives might be in danger as a result of his bugging. And then, the rest of the movie plays out, and it kind of is this. It feels to me like the height, in a way, of the 1970s sort of paranoia genre that cropped up, which has a lot of great movies in it. Of course, All the President's Men, 3 Days of the Condor, Parallax View.
Parallax View, right?
So but it really, to me, this one, I don't know, kind of stands. For me, it stands out. It's it's incredibly rewatchable, and it also is a movie that feels, despite the technology obviously being obsolete mostly, feels so modern. It feels like a movie that just in its tone and sensibility could have been made today, and it holds up quite well. At least that's my take. Why don't we start off with some historical context first?
Oh, man.
Buckle up.
Do you want to start on that, or you want me to throw a few things?
No, throw some stuff our way.
All right. So, this movie was obviously, it was made, I think, in, 73 and then released in 74?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Like that.
Yeah.
It was made between the two Godfather films. So, Francis Ford Coppola, he wanted to make this movie before the Godfather films, but the studios wouldn't give him the money because they were like, this plot sounds kind of weird and dodgy. Like, it sounds too artsy, which, kind of gets to, again, that era of Hollywood. So it was made in sort of what's now called the New Hollywood era, which is essentially, after the studio system kind of started to collapse due to changes in demographics. Once the baby boomers started getting older, and the cultural changes we saw in the '60s began to happen, the movie studios wanted to, they recognized that was a thing, and they wanted to reflect that. Yeah. So they started being more experimental in the films that they would put out, and they would throw like ridiculous amounts of money at films like. Like Bonnie and Clyde or Planet of the Apes. And a lot of these movies went way over budget, but they ended up being huge hits or very critically acclaimed films at the time. So, you also had a breakdown of historic structures as far as like narrative filmmaking was concerned. You had the rise of the sort of the anti-heroes, the sort of Dirty Harrys, and again, Bonnie and Clyde, Pale Rider. You had films like The Graduate. You had more risque subject matter because this is, again, post-code.
Right.
The Hollywood Code was done at that point. And so you had the nature of filmmaking and narrative filmmaking in particular was changing pretty dramatically. The Hollywood Code in particular was really problematic because once the McCarthy era was over and once the 60s kind of started to roll in and you started to see widespread cultural change, young people in particular were like, I don't want to see The Sound of Music 30,000 times. It was a great movie and it made a lot of money. I'm a fan of musicals just like anybody else, but so that sort of concept of like, oh, you could have The Graduate.
Yeah.
You could have, movies that had more complex subject matter where, the sort of more Hitchcockian kind of approach to filmmaking where you sort of mess with people a little bit. And, people found that interesting at the time.
I wonder too if it has anything to do with the Vietnam War is kind of raging in the background, and there's a kind of, I always think of the boomer generation as in the 70s starting to shift into a kind of the idealism of the 60s giving way to a kind of cynicism of the 70s. Like,
oh, definitely.
They're like, like all this protesting and stuff, what has it accomplished? Like the war goes on, it's dragging on. We haven't really changed anything. And all of our great, rock and roll heroes are dying.
Yeah, you have the 27 Club where Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and all these people died.
Yeah,
and Martin Luther King is shot. Malcolm X, all these people were killed, and then Nixon is reelected.
Yeah.
Which is culturally, like, you have to put yourself in the position of somebody who was, I don't know, 25 at the time. And all of these things are happening within like a 2-year or 3-year period. That has to be kind of, I don't want to say traumatizing, but I mean, it probably was.
Yeah, no, I imagine demoralizing, and I can imagine
demoralizing.
It would make you cynical. Like if Trump was reelected, right? This amount of cynicism and detachment and unhappiness just among young people, or among a lot of people, but especially among young people would be immense. Yeah, that's
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you had the kind of breakdown of historic structures in the studio system. You also had more character-driven films where you had really distinct characters that were intriguing and interesting, and you had the rise of method acting, which sort of reflected that. You also had a greater emphasis on cinematography and complexity of plot structure. Prior to that era, most movies were story based. And then they became more and more like character and mood based.
Mm-hmm.
So you would get movies like The Godfather is a great example where like half the movie is shot in the dark. And that never would, I mean, that's like sort of your classic sort of Sam Spade film, right? But those movies were not very common, mostly because of technical reasons. Because prior to that era, the cameras and the lenses that they used were really not good to shoot in dark situations. So you had like, most movies were shot on these bright sound stages where you had like 20K lights shining on people, making them sweat all the time. And, the idea of like a Stanley Kubrick film just wouldn't happen because technically it wasn't possible.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, I mean, so take us through. So the conversation is a situation, that arises in this environment. It's an environment of, cynicism, of changing Hollywood norms, new demands from the audience, a hunger for different stories. I mean, this is definitely a movie which is 100% character-based and very, very little story-driven, right? I mean, as we're going to get into, it's actually not at all clear what happens in this movie. Like, I think all three of us will have had a different interpretation of what happens in this movie, and that's great. So, but in a way, I think as a result, it almost makes it we don't need that to latch on to the greatness of the movie. You don't need that the story, you're not like, oh man, I need this to get resolved, or else I can't figure out like if this was a good movie or not. You're just like, yeah, no, this is a great movie, partly because it's such a fascinating character study of this guy, Harry Call, who embodies some of the kind of cynicism and paranoia. And I think, interestingly, this idea of guilt is going to play a big role in Harry's life and his choices. And you might think that is also collectively there's a kind of guilt or a kind of regret on the behalf of the generation of, well, we couldn't stop Vietnam and we couldn't stop Nixon. And, we're like living with the consequences of this and wondering whether we made the right choices or whether there was anything we could have done, whether it was just like the machine would have continued on regardless. So I wonder, in that sense, if Harry Call in a weird way embodies a lot of the forces that were happening at the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. The moral dilemma of, you live in a society, and the idea is that in a free and democratic society, supposedly, the people have some level of control over, which direction culture and government go in.
Right.
And after that era went through, people lived through it, there was a very clear understanding that it's going to do whatever it wants.
Yeah.
And you as an individual are probably not in a terribly good position or in a strong position to make sustained widespread cultural change.
Yeah.
It's one thing to make change, but then have it sustain itself through time is another challenge, as we are even witnessing today. I mean, think about this too. The movie was being made while Watergate was happening.
I know, that's incredible.
It was released months before Nixon resigned. And that, that's just completely insane to think about, that they were making a film about the very topic that was actually going on in the government at the time, with totally unrelated.
Yeah. And I know, I looked into that and I was like, and Coppola's like, no, I just thought it was a cool story. Like he had come up with the story, right? As you said, he wanted to do it before Godfather. So he had the idea 60s. Long before any of this Nixon stuff. Fascinating.
Okay. So there's the context in which the film was made, right? Which is it's sort of, which with regard to the craft of the film and sort of what was going on in Hollywood. You started to have, again, the influence of cinema verite, Italian film, where you would have just some dude with a 60mm camera following somebody down a sidewalk. And like, there's no extras. It's literally real people walking down the sidewalk past the actor. And you would see their genuine reactions to this, like some dude walking down the sidewalk. That concept, again, was very new and also very inspiring to a lot of the filmmakers that came up through that era. So there's that. You also had, in a lot of major cities, this was very common, where you sort of had this transition from the city being this sort of bohemian port town with like military influences to like a corporate center where you had, finance and banking. I mean, that stuff was always there, but you, in the 70s, and people, I don't know how many listeners have been to San Francisco, but you go to the financial district downtown and it's full of skyscrapers.
Yep. Right.
And people think of San Francisco as, like little Victorian homes all in a row, painted pretty colors. It's like, no,
The Full House houses?
Yeah, exactly. That's one very distinct part of the city, and most of the city is pretty low density, right? But downtown, it's a corporate center. I mean, you've got buildings that are 30, 40 stories tall. But that was all brand new at the time. And you can see in the movie, there's several shots where Harry Cole is walking through Embarcadero 1, and you see all these skyscrapers, the skeletons of the steel frames going up in the background.
There's construction going on constantly.
Yeah, Laura noticed that, like in the background, almost every shot in the background, there's construction.
Yep. Yeah,
and that's the thing.
The moment where he realizes that his landlady is reading his mail, there's just like a wrecking ball behind him, like taking out a building in the background.
Oh man, yeah, we'll get to that, but there's a funny story I'll tell you about that. But
okay,
that's a good point. No, it's great. So one thing to mention really quick is you had a concept called redlining, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. So in San Francisco, you had a guy named Justin Herman. He was the head of the San Francisco Planning Department, and he did this thing where they would take a map of like a predominantly African-American neighborhood, like the Fillmore district, for instance, and they would draw a red line around where you would have majority Black renters or owners. And they would say, okay, like if say you're a bank and you had people coming to you for loans to buy houses, they would say nobody within that zone gets to buy their house. And all of these properties are going to be eminent. We're going to use eminent domain. We're going to tear down all these buildings, and we're going to build like clean, affordable housing. And the funny thing is that, the city had this grand, supposedly from an exterior view, it looked like the city was doing this really nice thing. They're tearing down all these, 100-year-old Victorian homes that are lived in by 30 people in a room. And they're, supposedly building new clean housing. Well, the problem is that they would generally build far lower density housing. So you'd have a neighborhood with 50,000 people living in it, and then all of a sudden there's only enough housing for 10,000 people.
Right.
Where are all these people going to go? So, and we'll get to this in a second, but the building that they have Harry Cole living in is in that district. And that's what you see going on literally in the background of the film is them tearing down all these old buildings that were predominantly lived in by African Americans.
Is that did you call it the Fillmore district?
The Fillmore. Yeah. I mean, that area is more toward Hayes Valley, but the Fillmore kind of bleeds into Hayes Valley, and that's right where that building is.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's a minor side note as far as the film is concerned, but you can literally see this going on in the movie.
That's wild. That's wild. Definitely what you're saying, though, Robert. What's going on in the city? Well, the city is pushing out the diversity. It's pushing out the color, because that comes from the artists and the hippies and the people who from the 60s were generating all that interesting culture that we venerate now, in replacing them with what low density housing for rich white people, and also, corporate buildings.
Exactly.
So it is mirroring exactly that cultural shift that's happening between the 60s and the 70s. I wonder too, like how Harry Cole fits into this, not just thematically, but like as a person. So like Harry Cole, is he a guy is he like an ex-hippie who's like, kind of like now working for the man in a way? Or was he always a square? Like he's like the ultimate narc, right?
Pretty much.
You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, but he feels himself, he's an artist, you know, because he makes his own equipment. He doesn't like, he goes to these sort of conventions as like, I'm above all this. Like I work for myself. I follow my own code. I make my own equipment. So I don't think he would think he's working for the man, but anything that he does,
it's always for the man. Who's hiring him?
Who's hiring
like
somebody to
rich
survey somebody,
corporation.
surveil somebody else. Like,
He's preeminent in his field, as they say in the movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. He's, but that's so interesting because I wonder in a way if audience, I mean, I actually, let me just put it to you guys. Do you identify with Harry Cole as a protagonist? Do you like when you see him? Do you go like? No, I mean, do you empathize with him, or are you just like, nah, this guy's he's like a, you know, what I was saying before, like he's just a square. He's a paranoid. You know, he's actually really doing a harm to a lot of people, right? Or do you sort of empathize with his situation?
I mean, I feel for him because I think mostly because he's so lonely, but he also like really wants intimacy, and he's terrified of the, you know, what intimacy necessitates, which is a letting down of your guard and sharing something of yourself. And like, he wants it. He dreams about it. He's scared of it. He's lonely. He's a tortured little dude. I feel bad for him, but I don't really empathize with him. I don't see any of myself in him.
Because that's what I wonder, and I want to hear what you think about this too, Robert. Because I wondered if like audiences in '74, what they would have thought of Harry Cole. Would
like,
they
Harry's my guy?
Yeah, would they have been like, I like this guy, or would they have been like, fuck this guy? Like he's everything we were fighting against.
I mean, to a certain degree, it's a little bit of both because I mean, obviously on one degree, as you're saying, he's this guy's like an extreme square. And, you know, he's this like hyper religious dude who keeps to himself and is super socially awkward. Yeah.
Reprimands people for saying for Christ's sake.
Right. Yeah. You know, like you're a blaspheme. You know, I can personally both understand and empathize with that to a certain degree, having grown up Catholic. But you know, having now being a post-Catholic individual.
What the hell are they talking about, for Christ's sake?
Stanley, please, I'm trying to get this done.
All right, don't get excited, man.
Well, I'm getting fed up.
About what?
About you're asking me questions all day long.
Jesus.
Don't say that.
Well, for Christ's sake.
Stan, don't say that again, please. Don't use that word in vain. It bothers me.
What's the matter, Harry?
I think at the time, I mean, obviously the character of Harry Cole eventually is rebelling against his own kind of ethos because he starts to empathize with the people that he's recorded in the conversation.
Yeah,
and you know he's throughout the whole film he's grappling with his own notion of what is right.
Yep, and
sort of weighing that against his own sense of pride. Which, you know, again, those are very sort of religious themes, which I personally find fascinating just from an individual standpoint.
I think that's exactly right. No, I think you're right that he is this complex character. And so there are different facets to him, and he's pulled in these different directions.
Sure.
And part of what's interesting about the movie is to sort of see how he tries to reconcile these different parts of his, I don't know, of his persona. But
again, he's a form of anti-hero in a way.
Yeah.
Like you have the super square guy that in the end like tries to do the right thing and doesn't.
Yeah, it's sort of what happens. I don't know, but you wanted to talk about the look, like how they stylized.
Oh man,
yeah. So what were you thinking on that?
So in this film, you had just people like walking around on the street, and Harry, they intentionally made his character look kind of like schlubby, and you know he's wearing a suit that's like way out of fashion for the early 70s, and he's wearing and you know he has these like big thick rimmed glasses and this like sort of simpy mustache, and you know he did not look like a confident strong individual. But one of the most distinct things that he literally wears everywhere in this movie is this weird plastic raincoat.
Yeah.
And like he literally even wears it in bed with his sort of pseudo girlfriend.
Yeah, I know he does.
I forgot that he does that.
True. Yeah.
Oh, I love that coat.
Yeah, like they're making out in bed and he's got this fucking raincoat on. It's like, what are you doing, man?
Well, I'll tell you what he's doing. It's damp in San Francisco. What the movie didn't get right about was like, yeah, every time I go, it's just humid and my hair is frizzly. Like
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, living in San Francisco for almost 20 years, like you do learn to wear layers. It's
you gotta.
important.
Yeah. So I like that. The movie is true to San Francisco in that way. But yes, no, he is a total dork with that raincoat.
One thing about the raincoat that I thought was kind of interesting is that it's simultaneously like an extra layer of protection. So in that sense, it's like what Harry Cole wants is to cover himself up, but it's also transparent.
It's clear.
It's clear. So you see right through it. Like, it sort of serves these dual purposes of like trying to cover, but also expose. That's one thing that I was really interested about Harry is as how, as a character, he's a bundle of contradictions. In that, at least in the sense of there's this major clash between what he professes and who he is or how he in fact acts. So just to give a couple examples of this, so as we've said, he's a professional eavesdropper, but the thing that he fears most is the thing he does best. So there's this weird tension because he knows how to do it best, and thus he knows how he's most vulnerable. He's most afraid of the very thing he does for a living, namely invading other people's privacy. He also multiple times throughout the movie says, I don't care about the people. I don't even listen to the conversation. I just want a fat recording. I just want the fat tape. But of course, he becomes deeply intrigued and then sympathetic with and then obsessed by the couple that he records at the beginning of the film. He also, as it comes out, is dealing with an immense amount of guilt about this act, that this prior recording that he did, which led, I mean, who knows how causally responsible he was, but which ultimately led to the death of 3 people in New York, and presumably
it's a pretty gnarly death.
Yeah, no, totally, yeah. and we get
and led him to have to move away.
Exactly, we implied that he needed to leave New York to basically run away from this. So not only did he, he says, "Oh, I don't really care," but not only does we see him care, but he also clearly cares about those people. And then another thing is that he also says, maybe as a way of deflecting against the when Morantz sort of kind of throws it at him, like, hey, those guys died because of you. And he deflects and he says, well, I just turn in the tapes. What people do with them is out.
Yeah, it's
that's
none of my business.
None of my business. I'm not responsible for what they do with them. But at the same time, so he tries to say, like, I'm not responsible. But on the other hand, he, of course, feels immensely responsible. He's deeply afraid that actually he is deeply responsible for those people's deaths.
Later in the week. Sunday, maybe.
Sunday, definitely.
We had a much better track here if you'd paid more attention to the recording, less attention to what they were talking about.
Well, I can't see why a couple of questions about what the hell's going on can get you so out of joint.
Because I can't sit here and explain the personal problems of my clients.
Jagtar Hotel. 3 o'clock. Room 773.
I heard if you fill me in a little bit once in a while, did you ever think of that?
It has nothing to do with me, and even less to do with you.
It's curiosity. Did you ever hear of that? It's just goddamn human nature.
Listen, if there's one surefire rule that I have learned in this business is that I don't know anything about human nature. I don't know anything about curiosity. That's not part of what I do. This is my business.
It's an immense amount of guilt, and which is, again, a very interesting theme to have, being a very intense Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, no, exactly, yeah, and I think it's also and so he feels, and I think this comes to the Catholic thing as well, where there's another contradiction, which is that he desires to be anonymous and not reveal any of his private details, and yet throughout the movie, he over and over again, we see him confessing to people. So he confesses to the priest in the confessional. he, in his dream, to Anne, the woman he's bugging, he confesses not, well, he says like, I'm worried that something I did, might put you in danger, but he also confesses a bunch of things about his life, about his
he confesses to the showgirl assistant from the Moran's assistant
that he loves Amy.
Exactly. And he confesses to her that he wonders to her, like, would this, I don't know exactly what he says, but is this like a good thing or whatever? I'm in love with this woman, but I kind of keep her locked in an apartment in the basement.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then I just spy on her every now and again. Yes, he does.
Which he pays for. It's super weird.
It's so weird. Yeah.
I think in his twisted mind, like that justifies him like spying on her. He's like, oh, I provide for her and therefore I can just sneak around on the stairs and just like
and watch her.
Yeah.
That could be his justification. And this is a thing too, is that a lot of the things you're talking about sort of get to the central theme of again, getting back to relatability. We all, in the capitalist Western world, we all have to sometimes do things that we're not super down with just to make a buck.
Yep.
And this is a guy who's obviously chosen to do some pretty dodgy shit for the sake of making a ridiculous amount of money.
Yep.
And, and that's something that I think everybody has to grapple with to a certain degree.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you might see him as just reflective of the compromises we all have to make. And he, it's unfortunate that he has had to make these compromises which have affected his life in this way and made him feel all this guilt and stuff. But it's sort of like, I can sort of see that because I've had to make compromises in my life too.
Absolutely.
I think.
Absolutely.
But it's funny though, he takes so much joy and pride out of his work.
Yeah.
Like when he does eventually get goaded into bragging a little bit about how he manages to catch the conversation. And, like how many different devices he used and stuff. Like he loves it. And maybe he wishes that he could like use this skill of eavesdropping on people for, I don't know, a husband who wants to buy his wife the best gift ever or something, like some nice reason, but it's never a nice reason. Almost never.
It's never a nice reason.
It's never. Right. So he has to know that. But there's something about him as a person who he's like, I think he is fascinated by the content, even if he denies that. But he's certainly but he's very proud of and fascinated by the various means, the problem solving to catch that conversation.
That's totally right. I think though, as far as relatability, here's another aspect in which he is relatable. Everyone is fascinated to some extent by other people's private lives.
Totally.
Like that's
why Instagram functions.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. If here, you might even argue that it's at the core of a lot of dramatic film. Like, why do we care to watch Harry Caul go through this existential crisis? Well, it's because it's as if we're watching a window into this guy's life and we're getting to see him, deal with these existential issues in a way that is reflective of our issues. And so we sort of get this window into this other thing. And we see, okay, wow, he's going through similar things that I have. And it's just it's deeply fascinating. And it's the kind of issues that if you met Harry Caul in the street and you asked him, what kind of issues are you dealing with? He's not going to tell you because of privacy.
Exactly.
Right. And so maybe there is this, like, just as he is fascinated by the people he's bugging, like we're fascinated by watching his story and all that. And we want to know, just as he wants to know what's going on with Anne and the guy that they're bugging, we want to know. So there's this, that's what I was wondering about. Like, we relate to him as a viewpoint character because he embodies the desires that we have as an audience, even though he himself is almost like disgusted or guilt-ridden and horrified and of all of these things that he's doing. It's interesting that, of course, we don't feel that way because we're watching a fiction, but
you can still feel that way, though. I mean, if you're watching something,
someone do something bad,
the rubbernecking phenomenon, or like the Hanukkah points this out in Funny Games, but we can feel like both a sort of almost compulsive need to watch and also be aware of the fact that it's not like something desirable in ourselves if you want to watch it.
I agree. Yeah.
It's a very human response to, to just allow yourself a little bit of this or a little bit of that, or a lot, depending.
Yeah. I agree. Oh, one other thing is that, so the things that he tells in Anne in the dream, so he tells her 3 things.
I was very sick when I was a boy. I was paralyzed in my left arm and my left leg. couldn't walk for 6 months. One doctor said I'd probably never walk again. My mother used to lower me into a hot bath. It was therapy. One time the doorbell rang. She went down to answer it. I started sliding down. I could feel the water. It started coming to my chin and my nose. And when I woke up, my body was all greasy from the holy oil she put on my body. I remember being disappointed I survived. When I was 5, my father introduced me to a friend of his, and for no reason at all, I hit him right in the stomach with all my strength. He died a year later.
They're all things apparently that come from Coppola's childhood.
Really?
Yeah. So I found this out just kind of Googling around. He apparently, Coppola was having trouble, maybe himself, like us, getting into the character. He didn't like the character, I guess. And so what he did was he knew he needed the character to confess some stuff. So he decided to put in things from his own childhood to make it more personal to him as a director, to make him relate more to the character. And so those 3 things, I guess, are from Coppola's childhood.
Fascinating.
Anyway, it's a tidbit.
I did not know that.
It is also interesting, though. I mean, the idea of, and Laura and I were talking about this before, that the hitting the friend's father, he said, I hit him as hard as I could in the stomach. And then he died a year later. This idea that like there's a kind of hubris to thinking that, as just a childlike hubris, to thinking that like you were the one who caused it, right? He feels guilty about this because he's worried that maybe I caused it. And it's similar to the kind of hubris that maybe, it's simultaneously hubristic and also, guilt, the source of guilt, to feel like you are responsible for the people that died as the result of you bugging, right? I mean, you might just think of it like, well, I am just a bugger. Like I just record this stuff and then it's out of my hands in a way. And it's hubristic to think that like you are somehow enabling, I don't know, these bad things to happen. So there is this kind of parallel between that event, that he describes and what's happening to him right now. The very thing he worries, he'll have this guilty conscience forever if these people die.
I think the thing about Harry Cole is that his contradictions are just very, very extreme. But when we sort of teased out what those contradictions are, we saw that like they were all very human and we all have those contradictions within ourselves. It's just that this character is living in that contradiction to the most extreme. Yeah. So I think it's just like an inflation of conditions and experiences that we all have all the time. Our own human contradictions.
I mean, as somebody who, also professionally, has / whatever, a craft, I can relate to that aspect of it very well.
Yep.
Of course.
I mean, there's kind of the unspoken, there's the social contract and then there's the sort of working man's contract, which is even if you don't get paid very well for a given job, whether it's, I don't know, bricklaying or, building rebar cages for some construction project or who knows what, or in my case, photography and videography, you take pride in your work and you do the work because you take pride in it. It's a self-feeding cycle. And some people have to be very careful, how much they actually invest in that, so that it feeds back properly into their own sort of motivations and creative loop. In Harry Cole's case, it's obvious that he takes a lot of pride in his work.
Yeah.
That's a central part of his like reason to get up every day is to go do this thing and do it very well because he is the best. And the Moran guy, he's obviously also motivated by that.
He seems to exist, I think, to make Harry more likable because that guy is the worst.
Oh yeah, he's super slimy.
He's definitely he's definitely a foil. But on the taking pride thing, Robert, actually, I should mention. So I told Laura when we watched it, I was like, I don't want you to take this as an insult because I'm going to explain.
No.
But I was like, I see Robert in Harry Cole, aspects of Robert in Harry Cole, but it's exactly that part of the character. It's that he takes so much pride in the craft. Then and that was one thing
I knew what you meant immediately because I was like, oh, doesn't Robert do woodworking and things like that? Like that's what that was my response.
Let me just give one example so that the audience can know what I'm talking about here, and maybe you, Laura. I'm not sure if I told you this. So Robert, back when we were in Santa Rosa, my parents got some desk from some doctor who was like, I don't know if he was moving or something. It was this massive desk. And they were like, all right, Justin, you just got a new desk. Like it's like a piece of shit. Like it's huge and it's all messed up. It's got, you remember this, Rob?
With the cigarette burns.
Burns and shit. And so I don't know. I hope they paid you well enough, but they were like, you know,
they did.
Yeah. So Robert came and for like weeks would come over and put like 7, 8, 9 layers of lacquer and finish on this desk. And you just came over and you would like sand it down, put a layer on.
It was like an 8-foot long metal framed walnut top office desk from like the 60s. Yeah. And this thing probably weighed, I don't know, like 2,000 pounds.
Yeah,
I don't even know how much it weighed.
Do they still have it, you think, Jess?
No. I'll tell you what happened to it.
Okay.
But your parents, so I was getting into woodworking at the time professionally, and your parents hired me to basically fix the cigarette burns on the top of this thing.
Yeah.
And it also needed to be refinished because it was just old.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know how to fix this. So I just like, I sanded down the cigarette burns and then filled them with like putty that I made from the sawdust I got. And, you know, it's
amazing.
Amazing. I can, and this gets back to the Harry Call character. Like there's a lot of aspects of the character I could relate to personally. And one of them is absolutely the obsessive compulsive side of like, I'm going to do this thing and it's going to be perfect.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, Robert, you had
there's no force in the universe that can stop
exactly.
me.
You had no real, I mean, beside that, you didn't have any reason to make it great. You just had to like make it look decent, right? But you made, this was like this desk, by the time you were done with it, it was like the best desk in the world. It was so smooth on the top. It looked so good. So I took that desk to Davis the next year. I took it to UC Davis and then I only had it for 1 year because I moved apartments and it was literally too big and heavy.
Oh, no.
I couldn't move it to the next apartment that I had moved to.
Do you think it's still in that same apartment? It just never left?
Maybe because I left
tenants
it there.
just circle around it and enjoy it for however long they're there.
I literally just left it. I was like, here you go. Like you get a free desk. And they're like, cool. I don't have a desk. And I mean what I think is so fat, and so there's, you know, that's a sad story about the desk, but the happy story is like, Robert was like,
it's a process. It's not the final product.
No,
it's a happy story.
But really it made, I don't know. I was just like, that is, Robert,
that's just how I am.
You embodied a way of living that is admirable, right? It's admirable to say, I'm going to take an intrinsic,
quite a statement.
To take an intrinsic, you know, value in this thing, which, you know, instrumentally only has a little bit of value, but I'm going to intrinsically value it in this task that I've been given, make it as best as I can. And, you know, I just think that's incredible. So praise be, we can move on, but I just wanted to shout that out.
No, I know. That is the moment I think where I started to be like a little bit on Harry Call's side. I think when we do see him compared to Bernie Moran's, because I mean, Bernie's good at what he does too, but he seems to be in it for the accolades more than anything else. Like in that story,
and
he's
the
like,
money,
and the money.
He wants money.
Totally. And he's like, and the power, like he feels where Harry denies that he has power and maybe thinks he does, but denies it out loud. Like Bernie's like, no, like we control the universe as buggers. Like he's telling this story about the murder that happened maybe as a result of Harry's bugging, like joyfully.
Yeah. And also like, he says he got a president like to lose or elected or something.
Right.
He's like,
that's right. He's
like, I'm not going to say which party, but
right. He has this thing. He's like, we are the masters of the universe pulling the strings. You know, that's what he's in it for.
Yeah.
And that's not what Harry's in it for. Was there something that you wanted to note about sound editing in this movie? Because sound editing for me often like totally like passes me by. I think you're much more attuned to this, Justin, than I am. And I don't really pay attention. Now we've like got the surround system. So where I'm paying more attention to the way that a movie is mixed. But yeah, I was just curious to hear what you guys thought about the sound editing in a movie that is all about sound editing.
I mean,
what's your take?
I mean, the really obvious take is how they use the, you know, this sort of process of editing to tell in a way, tell the story. Which is reflected in what Coppola himself is doing with the film. So the editing of the movie sort of reflects, that is the visual editing of the movie reflects the sound editing that Harry Call is doing. So as Harry Call, almost every time he's replaying the tape, we get a cut to some shot of the characters saying the lines. So there's a kind of mirroring of the visual, which is obviously being edited by Coppola, and the thing that Gene Hackman is doing as
Right.
as Harry Call when he's editing the thing. The other thing that is really cool about it is you see the process. So you get to watch like, and it's very easy to understand what he's doing. He's got 3 tapes. He shows you there's 3 tapes on one side. There's 1 tape on the other side. He's mixing the input signals from the 3 tapes to the 1 tape. That's basically
just turning the levels up and down.
Up and down. That's like
which one is best at a given time.
That's all he's doing. Of course, then later he brings in some EQ or whatever to like change the frequency band or whatever. But the most of it is basically just like which one is better, A, B, or C. And it is so, just when you see that, and nobody has to tell you, he doesn't have to point to John Cazale and be like, see what I'm doing here? The audience, you just get it. You understand that this is what's happening. It's all physical, and I love that. And
it's very basic sound recording technique. You know, you basically have multiple tracks or multiple versions of a single thing, and you create a master off of that, and that's what you use as your final, quote unquote, final take. You know, and this is where shit gets really geeky, because most of that equipment was actually owned by Walter Murch, who was the sound editor and the film editor for this movie. And Walter Murch is, for anybody not familiar with sort of film geekery, he is a preeminent figure in the history of film editing, especially with regard to sound editing. He did a lot of really experimental stuff in the late 60s, early 70s. And, he's heavily associated with Coppola and a lot of his films. But he also did a bunch of his own movies later on. And when I took sound editing, when I studied cinema, he was like the guy that all the teachers would point to. And what's interesting is that a lot of the techniques that he developed through that era are now just like standard practice in editing. Like, I'll give you an example. One of the cuts you can make, like between 2 scenes.
Oh, are we going to do J-cut?
Somewhat. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Sorry. I just got excited.
I'll let you geek out on that.
The one I was
going to talk about
got hot on the mic, so just calm down.
Sorry.
So
Robert.
one of the things that you can do is, this is kind of a J cut, but what you can do, one of the things you can do is, you can either insert like, I don't want to say white noise, but sounds that are sort of ethereal between shots, and you can sort of have something ramp up as you're about to make an edit, and then it ramps down afterward. Sometimes that's a J cut, which means that you basically have the sound from the next shot coming in to the previous shot before you even get there. So there's kind of like there's a lead in essentially. And he did that a lot in this movie. Like there's there's a shot that I loved where Harry Call was standing in the elevator, and the Cindy Williams character, Anne, is it?
Anne, I think, yeah.
Yeah. She comes into the elevator too, and he sort of like scoots to the other side of the elevator because he feels uncomfortable being around her. And then you start to hear this, and you hear the wind from the elevator shaft as the elevator goes down, and then you start to hear this like squealing, screeching noise. And then there's a cut, and then you have Harry in his shop like rewinding the tapes.
And it's,
wow.
I see.
Yep.
And it's like an immediate lead into that. And that technique is just like standard practice in pretty much any film editing process.
I think
today.
I read this somewhere, but it kind of makes sense to me. So I'm just going to put it out there, but I have no source to cite. But it seems intuitive to me that one of the reasons the J-cut is natural to us seems to me because it reflects the idea of when you hear a noise that's out of your field of vision, and then you turn your head. So you hear the sound first, and then you go, oh, what's that? And that's like the visual catching up with the sound.
Yeah. You have a new field of information that suddenly you have to analyze and figure out what's going on. And that also adds immensely to the intrigue of a given situation. It adds to kind of the depth of the film by doing that.
That's right. Yeah. Like, you're like, what's this now?
Yeah. You're constant. It's like this like smorgasbord of things to focus on and to try to dissect, while you're also trying to figure out what the hell's going on in the story. Because all of these elements that we're talking about, there's a hierarchy of what's supposed to be important. And one of the greatest things that a filmmaker can do, like Christopher Nolan and a lot of other guys are really good at this, about adding things into the movie where to distract the audience, to make them think that something is important when actually it's not very important. And that's again something that really came out of the new Hollywood movement. Was you had a lot of filmmakers that were just kind of messing with the audience a little bit. Whereas prior to that era, you didn't have a lot of that in filmmaking. I mean, Hitchcock is obviously famous for that, but Hitchcock is famous for being Hitchcock because no one else was doing that sort of thing. And then you had a lot of filmmakers that were inspired by that kind of narrative filmmaking later on.
Should we go into the plot of this movie? I mean, I think if anything, the only thing in the plot that there were a couple things that I think are interesting to focus on when it comes to the plot of this movie. One of which is what, as we get beyond, I think, the 2/3 mark of the movie, things start to unravel and the movie starts to become more impressionistic and less, and maybe even more in Harry Call's subjective state of mind and less of, and then we feel like we can trust him less and less, I guess, as the movie goes on.
And he trusts himself less and less.
Exactly. Too. Yeah. And that's reflected.
He doesn't even know what's going on.
And probably the scene where this becomes most jarring is the scene at the hotel, the Jack Tar Hotel.
Yeah. Jack Tar Hotel, which is, again, we'll get into locations later, but
where is it? Yeah.
Well, it doesn't exist anymore. It was, it's really quick. The history of the hotel. So they built, there's a hill in San Francisco called Cathedral Hill, which is not far from where I used to live in the Tender Knob. And you have a lot of churches and cathedrals that were on this hill, hence the name. And there's this big, huge modernist one that's there now that everybody calls the dishwasher because that's what it looks like. Anyway, so there was this hotel that was built, and I want to say in the 60s, and the exterior looked very Mondrian-esque, like lots of bright colors and distinct lines, and it was super garish for the time. And it was called the Jack Tar Hotel, and it was very controversial. And later on, they dulled down the exterior to make it more palatable to city residents, and they renamed it the Cathedral Hill Hotel. And then that went defunct, 15 something years ago. And they tore it down, I want to say, 5-6 years ago to build a Sutter Health complex. So now it's like a big hospital complex.
Bummer. Because one of the main selling points of the Jack Tar Hotel is that you could get a bathroom where the toilet overflows with blood.
Blood, yeah. That's just a standard feature.
Oh, I thought that was the deluxe room. You had to ask specifically for that.
No, that's you get like a body or two in addition to that.
Yeah, it's like
quick thing. When Harry Call pulls back the shower curtain, I'll never forget this. The first time I saw that movie, I thought there was going to be like a body in there.
Yeah. Of course, yeah,
and because that's the whole scene leads up to like he pulls the curtain back, and then there's supposed to be something, and there's nothing there.
Nothing.
And the camera
he takes that little breath too. He goes, and then does it like he's freaking out.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
It's, if you look at the way the shots are, like the camera gets closer and closer in, and then he pulls the shower curtain back, and then you have a view of like a wider angle view of the room, and there's just nothing going on.
Yeah, it's almost like a sound effect goes wah wah.
It's completely clean. It's totally clean. So that's why I think. Okay, but before that, actually, actually, let's back up. Right. I mean, I'm just trying to know. I'm just trying to think of where the hallucinations might start. And I think Laura is even going to push that they start even further back. But arguably, you could think they start.
Well, they do.
You could. Okay. Well, we're going to argue. With me. We're going to argue about the plot. But one place where you might think you might really begin to think he's hallucinating is when the first time he goes to bug, he's in the adjoining room and he sticks the probe in the wall to hear. And what he's hearing is, he's hearing them talk or whatever, but he's also hearing like a tape being rewound.
Yeah, he's hearing the tape that he made.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's hearing his tape. Yeah. And so already you're like, what is he listening to? And then the second thing that hits you is like, he goes out to the balcony and then the like bloody handprint on the wall, right? And like she's like hits the handprint and leaves the blood stain. And then he runs back in the room. He puts the Flintstones on the TV and he climbs under the covers.
Yeah.
And he passes out. But like that immediately you're like, this is very weird. Like what's happening? Because
that entire scene is just so bizarre.
It's very strange, partly because of how he's reacting. Like you would think that if a person bloody handprint, you'd be like, I'm going to go see if I can save them, or I'm going to
call the cops
police
anonymously and leave or something. Do something. Don't fall asleep.
It's in a way.
He just like jumps into bed and like passes. I don't know if he went into shock or
Yeah,
what the deal
I
was
think
supposed
so.
to be there.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting that he almost reverts back into a childlike state, right? And I think that maybe partly why it's a cartoon on the TV is that
I definitely got that too.
He hides under the covers like a kid would, and the TV is playing, and
he still has his raincoat on.
You got to keep the raincoat on, man. You never know when the blood is going to come out of the toilet, in which that raincoat comes in handy. But yeah, so then but immediately you're like, he's not reacting a way a normal adult would to this. So something weird is happening. Then he goes next door and he finds it's perfect. Everything is perfectly fine. And he finds the overflowing bloody toilet, which again, you're like, that's...
Yeah. That alone is just like, there's so many questions. Like how, I mean, I know how toilets work. How did they just how did they shove blood down the pipe?
Yeah, exactly.
So that when you flush it, it comes like that. That's not the way toilets work.
Well, you know that, Robert, you know that at the Jack Tar Hotel, the toilets are like a garburator. So you just kind of garburate a body into the toilet, and that's why it gets
Which is apparently what they did.
Yeah.
There's just like a garbage grinder down there, and they just, it's got a self-cleaning mechanism.
But what a
curling in a ball right now.
But what a psychologically, visceral thing to be like, this is
so
a depiction of like the bubbling up to the surface of all the repressed guilt and
absolutely,
and all the conflict within him, and it's just like bubbling up, and it's this nasty bloody mess. There's even a toilet paper.
Yeah, there's like rags and shit.
Yeah. And it's just overflowing. I mean, it's such an evocative image.
So I got a question.
Yeah.
So he flushes the toilet. It literally overflows blood and rags all over the bathroom floor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What happens after that? He just and he's leaving his fingerprints everywhere. He's like touching doorknobs and he just leaves? What happens there?
I think this is more argument that what we're seeing is not real, right? Because again, how is he going to get out of this? He's left his fingerprints all over this, and then there's going to be blood everywhere. The cops are easily going to be called. This is not
that entire scene seems like some version of a hallucination to some degree. And what's interesting about the way that Coppola made it was that it's really, everybody has their own take, and it's really hard to determine what is real there, what actually happened.
Exactly.
In the end, obviously, we know that the director was killed, and sort of.
But was he?
Okay, well,
killed?
Robert. So let's get. So here's the next piece of plot that I think is tricky. So and just to foreshadow, we're going to talk about the pivotal line of the movie where the focal stress matters. But it turns out Call in a final kind of run through of the tape. Here's the line: "He'll kill us if he gets the chance." He hears it in a way which suggests to him that they are actually plotting to kill Robert Duvall, the director, and not vice versa. And then what we see. So already you might think, okay, well, he's heard it one way the whole movie, and now he's hearing it this other way. So which way is the real way? Maybe neither.
Well, he initially hears it, so it sounds like the couple is going to get killed.
Exactly. So
then later on he hears it so that
it sounds like they are plotting to kill the director.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so then he now kind of, in this kind of flashback to the hotel, he reinterprets the things he thought he saw. So now no longer the bloody handprint is not hers, it's Robert Duvall's, the director. And then he even imagines the body lying there
lying in the bed
with the shower curtain over it. And then what we learn is that the director has died in a car accident. Harry Call goes to the building to I don't know. I think he goes there to confront the director or something. But then he sees that the guy actually died, and then there's all these people there.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. So the director doesn't have a name. I didn't realize that. Yeah. So he thinks Anna's dead, right? First he thinks Anna's dead.
Yes.
He goes to confront the director. He sees that Anna's sitting in a limousine.
Yeah.
She's alive. Then in that very moment, he also picks up a newspaper that has a headline about a car crash.
Yep.
But it couldn't have made a reference to any name. Or does it say like a director was like, or is
I think
it
it
just
says executive or something
an
like
executive?
that.
Oh, okay. And then he just draws that connection.
Yeah, well then there's this, but then
there's this like a press
there's
conference.
like a press conference or
press
something
conference.
happening.
But she's coming down the stairs for
Yes,
that.
so it's clearly,
there's some sort of time has elapsed between those things. But that's where everything's getting very muddled.
It's very muddled. The editing, weirdly, the editing, you might think of the movie as like, the editing now is becoming more and more like the initial cut of the audio. It's becoming more disjointed and more confusing. And he's revisiting the scenes and they're becoming like chaotic and it's unclear. It's hard to follow what's happening. And so maybe this is suggestive again that his mental state is deteriorating. And you might wonder to how much is it deteriorating? How much can we trust what we're seeing? Even to the extent that maybe the director is not dead. Maybe like that was even a hallucination. Like it's actually unclear at that point.
I mean, it's obvious that the character of Harry Cole is not the most like well-balanced, stable individual to begin with. Like he obviously has certain demons, et cetera, et cetera. And at first it's really easy to just sort of dismiss those as like, oh, he's just a weird, quirky dude. But then all these things happen. And it's like, oh, wow, he's like, is he hallucinating here? Is he making this stuff up?
Yeah.
Like what, it starts to blur the line, as you're saying, between his perception and what is actually reality.
I think that is the thing where now it's totally open-ended. Like I'm at that point, like not totally sure if
you might as well just be in a Lynch film at this point.
Yeah, I really do think like it really has, he's transcended narrative plotting. And it's, I don't really know what's going on in the movie. And then he gets this call from, just to finish it up, he gets the call from Harrison Ford saying like, we're listening to you, playing a recording of him that he was just doing, playing the sax. And then he looks for the bug and there's no bug to be found. So, you just end the movie in like this state of like total uncertainty as to, did he get that call? And also like Harrison Ford is in on it. Like, it's this massive.
Did he set the director up? Like what's his motivation?
Exactly. Like it's so convoluted. And I'm sure somebody has like a really clear way through it. But to me, it's kind of fun to just play in that ambiguity and allow the film not to resolve itself, allow the film to just be in this state of unease about what happened, much like Harry Cole's state of mind is one of unease about what's going on in his life and his, is he even in a position to evaluate whether, anything in front of him is real. If that, now we know where that's where the end of the film is. The end of the film is basically like he's been driven mad by his paranoia, his guilt or shame about what he does, his cutting himself off from everyone else. So he has no contacts. So, because you might think if he had a friend, his friend, he could rely on that friend to help him understand what's real and what's not, but he doesn't have any friends. And so the film almost says like, look, if this is the trajectory he was on all along. And now this is just the inevitable conclusion of like shutting yourself off from the world and thinking that everyone's out to get you. You just end up in a situation where you cannot distinguish what's real from what's not.
And the ultimate sort of representation of paranoia.
It's absolutely. And it's so, it really is, to me, it feels solipsistic in that the world shrinks down to just him. There's nothing else. It's just him and his like demons. And like, he might as well just be in a padded cell because it's unclear whether he's going to be able to ever like enter, a society again.
At the very least, he's going to have to answer to the building owner for the destruction in his apartment.
I thought about that too. I was like, that landlady is going to be, she gave him that nice wine for his birthday and now this is how he repays her.
I mean, I hope nobody's living below him because holy shit.
Oh,
yeah. I wondered about that alarm too. But I was like, that's annoying.
Every time he goes in the door. Wow.
I was like, if I was his neighbor, I'd be pissed. But yeah, I love this movie. There's so much stuff in it it's so dense. It feels like I was just thinking about when he's ripping up the wallpaper and you see a really quick glimpse of like an airplane wallpaper.
Yeah, it's like kids
underneath.
wallpaper.
Yeah, it's like a nursery
Yeah.
or a kid's room. And it's just like,
Layers.
it's so right. Like, it's just like a reminder of like the density of this city and how like you strive for complete isolation, but you're living like in a space that other people have occupied and loved in and like had lives in. And there's just like all these like, it's
There's
like
ghosts there.
Yeah, totally. You're living with ghosts. You're in a community, whether like no matter how hard you try to stay away from it. But I just love that little glimpse of an airplane that evokes so much just
a really
in
good
half a second.
Yeah.
You live in a place like San Francisco or in New York or wherever,
Yep.
where there's generations and generations of like culture and richness that came before you. And, you know, that's, to me, that's what endears a place like that to me. And that's honestly why I lived in San Francisco for so long.
I'll add one more. Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, and then I have another thing to say too.
On the same point?
Something similar. I would just go ahead, Jess.
No, you go.
Well, I was just going to say another thing that I really loved about this movie that sort of connected there. The conversation doesn't just talk about like, you know, we're together, we're lovers, he would kill us if we had the chance. Like they talk about other things, Christmas gifts, but then they also have this moment where they look at a man who's experiencing homelessness, and she says like, that's terrible. And I feel like that's one of the clips actually that gets played like the most, because you never hear it in its entirety, but we keep going back to that. And she says it's terrible because like whenever I see somebody like this, I just think he's somebody's baby boy.
Somebody's baby
boy. And for her, like what's so sad about that is not like what he's, you know, the hunger that he's experiencing or the cold that he's experiencing, because that's what the partner says. He tells the story about you know, some homeless people,
the newspaper strike,
right, and men who freezed as a result. But that's not what's like bothering her so much. It's just the anonymity of it, like that he has this life, he has parents, he has people, he had people that cared about him, and now he's just like on a park bench, and people are like acting as if he doesn't exist. Like we're all so densely crammed together, and yet like he's invisible. And the anonymity, the very thing that Harry Call is striving for, is what like devastates her about that scene. Anyway, I love that part, but it connected to me in terms of just like living in a dense city and being around people and being in a community, and like your lives are intersecting in such ways, and yet also it can be so impersonal and anonymous to be in a city like that.
The point I was going to make was actually, no, this is good, because the point I was going to make was exactly the exact opposite of that.
Oh, good.
So just as a counterpoint on what you're saying, which I love that point. And I think it's a really good point. The point I was going to say was that, if you think about how there are these generations that have lived in the spaces that we now occupy, in this case, Harry Call occupies, there will be people that live in the space he now occupies. Mm-hmm. And what he's finding when he peels back the wall is he's finding the traces of these past generations. Like he's finding that he can never be fully anonymous, because he will leave traces that future generations will find. They'll find the footprints that he left in the ground, so to speak. And there'll be these things that, you know, so he, in a way, this quest for anonymity and privacy is a futile one.
Right.
And that's one thing you might think of the wallpaper revealing, is that like, underneath the wallpaper is the past, you know, the traces of the past generation. So it's in a weird way, the exact opposite of what you were saying.
Yeah.
But I think that I think both ideas can sort of live in the same space.
Harry Call, so many contradictions.
He's a bundle of
land of contrasts.
Yeah.
You want me to bum you guys out really quick?
Yes.
Please.
Yes.
I was feeling much too cheerful.
To your last point, Justin, I'm going to tell a little story.
Yeah.
So many years ago, in my old apartment in San Francisco, I had two French doors that separated the living room from the bedroom. And at one point, one of them got like messed up or something. And you would have this constant flow of air that would come down from like the attic of the building through the doorway, which smelled funny.
Mm-hmm.
And you would get like smells from other people's apartments blowing down. And when an ex-girlfriend of mine moved in with me, she couldn't handle it. And so I didn't tell the building owner, but I tore the wall open. I cut a big hole in the wall and like filled it up with expanding foam.
Oh, nice.
And put drywall over it, and I patched it up so that you could never tell. But before I did that, I left a letter in the wall and talking about like myself and what the date was and what was going on. And like here,
That's
and
so
I mentioned
cool.
like, oh, I love this apartment and here's like when I moved in, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the bummer. When I moved out of that place, and this is something that sadly is very common in the last 4 or 5 years, when the most recent tech boom hit, you had a lot of building owners that would go to their management companies and they would, the second anybody would move out of a building, they would go in and literally gut the entire unit down to the studs and remove all traces of anything that was there before. And then like put fresh drywall up and like cheap Home Depot trim and like cheap IKEA cabinets. And they would market these things as like upscale units, and because they looked fresh and fancy and modern, and you would completely lose all of the character and all of the like, again, the stories that you would be able to see just by looking around. And that, for me, that was like a huge, huge bummer when I moved away, was just knowing the fact that like the second I moved out of that place, that all of those traces would be completely destroyed forever.
Just to continue, let's just keep adding on to this because I think what they're doing there is by removing the character, is they're anonymizing it by making it exactly like every other one. They're making it just like, you're in your unit, but your unit's the same as everyone else's unit. There's no Robert's note in the wall because we got rid of it.
Right. And that's also the larger process that's happening in the city of San Francisco in this moment, like in the 70s, but also when Robert leaves. But like that's the process that's happening in the background of this movie the entire time.
Yeah.
Exactly. And more recently, with regard to San Francisco history, you have, and in a lot of places like New York and I'm sure Boston, you have people who come to a place, they make a ton of money, and then they're not there to like put roots down. No. They're not there to like add their character to the space or invest in the culture or community. They're just there to make a buck, and then they move back to Omaha or wherever and they buy a mansion, and that's like their life. And that's that's the truth of what happens with most people. That move to a place like that these days. It's almost like you move to a place like San Francisco for the bragging rights, whereas somebody 30 years ago would have moved there because they wanted to be like a part of the community. And there's this notion of community.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's also, I think a lot of it is that people move to these places when they're young, they have a job there in tech, and then they want to have a family, and they're like, well,
your priorities are different.
Yeah, and then their priorities change. But I think it's like, but it wasn't always that way. You could just live in the city, and you could like, there was space for people to raise their families and so on. But
it wasn't like that as recently as 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And that was the sad part of me living. Anyway, this is a bummer. I don't want to go on about this, but that's a or other podcast.
Oh my God, I'm going to be thinking about that note in the wall for
the note
a while
in the wall
now.
that's really cool.
I wonder if it's still there. I mean, it's been like 5 years or 2 years since I moved away almost, but so.
Should we just like maybe do a round robin on like where we thought he lost the thread? Harry Call?
Okay. I mean, I feel like he lost the thread in the hotel room.
In the hotel room? I think it happened before.
Where? When?
Really?
I wonder if it happened before this movie started. I wonder if he's like, I don't know how much of this job is real. I don't know. Like,
what's interesting is that earlier in the film, there's a cut to the murder scene, just like randomly put in there.
Yeah.
And is this guy imagining this? Like, where is that like a thought that was in his head beforehand? And then he sort of like is trying to apply that to whatever construed thing he's made up.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I think watching his interaction with Amy made me feel like he was really off kilter. Like she sings a little song and it's the same song that Anne sang. And he's like, where did you hear that? Why did you sing that? And, it might spook him. I can imagine how like he's ruminating on this recording. It's bothering him. And then she sings the same song. Like that's eerie. It's spooky, but it's not like he goes into an accusatory mode immediately. And I think the kind of like conspiratorial paranoia that that headspace he has to already be in order to be like, why did you sing that? I think he's already lost the thread. I think he's like,
I mean, he's definitely not a balanced person.
No, but I do wonder, like at that point, like how much the crazy thing about this recording is that like nobody else has heard it really. Like Stanley helps record it, but like nobody else has stitched it together. He has no outside confirmation that any of this is happening. And I don't know, guys. I think he might have made the whole thing up. It just feels like this anonymous director, that office building doesn't feel real. It's all so strange.
Did you have a thought, Robert? Are you going hotel?
I'm going to go with hotel.
Okay.
To me, but from what it sounds like, from what we've talked about in the last, X amount of time, it sounds like my perspective is much more concrete than yours. The whole movie makes a lot of sense to me in a lot of ways, as far as like how one thing leads to another. The one thing that I do have a problem with is the fact that you have like, there's a sequence of cuts where after he flushes the toilet and then all this blood comes out and then he just leaves like, whatever, I just left a ton of blood everywhere, like nobody, and my fingerprints. And then you have, and then you have later on, I think during the press conference, it cuts back to the hotel room and there's these shortcuts of like blood smears and like stuff everywhere, like a murder scene. And at that point, I always think like, okay, what did he actually see in that room? Or is he making this up? Is this a projection? I don't know. Personally, I think it's just a tool that Coppola used to like, as part of the sort of adding to the intensity of that particular scene, showing that like, yeah, they're having this press conference and like everybody's lying about how the director died. And, Cindy Williams goes off, goes on and, gets the limo and like the controlling interest in the company. And that's sort of held against this like bloody murder scene that happened previously. Yeah.
I mean, it could be that he's just sort of imagining like what might have happened, but the guy did die. Yeah. She did, take him out and so on. So yeah.
And they had to move the body from the hotel into some sort of...
No, they put him in the toilet. They ground him up.
Oh, right. I forgot about the carburetor toilet.
Yeah, I got the carburetor.
My apologies to the Jack Tar Hotel.
That's what you get when you buy the deluxe room.
Come on.
That's what happens.
Come on, Laura. Yeah. You can't do it anymore. It's not there anymore.
I'm just saying, in Dallas, there was like there used to be, so there's in Dallas, there's a museum, Justin's in there with me, called the Sixth Floor Museum, which is at the book depository where Lee Harvey Oswald shot President Kennedy. Or did he? Anyway, sorry.
Dun, dun, dun.
Just it's like, if you get into, I'm going to make us watch JFK at some point for this podcast.
Do the JFK
and we're going to find out that I'm like a lunatic. But anyway, sorry. My point is, for years, many, many years, is no longer there, which is a bummer. But there was a dude who set up his own rogue museum called the Conspiracy Museum that explained how like every assassination in a period of 150 years were all connected, man. And it had like videos and charts and stuff. It was like a real place you could pay admission. It wasn't just like Justin saw a guy explaining why the grassy knoll was like... He saw some lunatic peddling his DVD outside the actual book depository museum. That's not this. This was like a physical museum, Justin, and it was so cool.
Okay, so that makes it legit then.
Yes.
How can you argue with the physical museum?
This is an actual like space that somebody rented.
Yes, he paid rent for the museum, the Conspiracy Museum, but. I'm not saying that this guy was right. My point is, I feel like this whole director got murdered in a hotel room and then they moved the body from the hotel room into the feels like something that guy from the Conspiracy Museum would cook up. I don't think any of this happened.
Laura sees a conspiracy everywhere.
I mean, that's the great thing about a film like this, or a lot of these kinds of films, is that you can it leaves you asking what the hell happened.
Yeah. Justin's going to cut this whole thing about the conspiracy. I know you are.
It's staying in. It's staying in. It's going to play twice. It's going to play twice. All right. So let's now transition slightly from plot.
Let's.
Although this is still relevant to the plot. The pivotal...
Wait.
Oh,
hold on. Are you going to talk about the bug?
No. Sorry, you want to say about the bug? Sorry.
We skipped, that's like one of the like best things in the movie that leaves it off at the end is like, where is the bug?
Okay, well, yes, good.
Where is the bug?
I had assumed that there is no bug, but sorry, on your interpretation, Robert, there is a bug. So where is the damn bug then?
So I've changed my mind.
Okay.
Originally, when I first saw the film, so earlier in the movie, you've got Moran talking about this like thing that he made over the phone where like the phone doesn't even pick up and it records what's in the room.
Yeah, the harmonica tone thing. Yeah.
The first time I saw that movie, I thought that's what it is. Because he has the phone in the room and like it doesn't ring. And then all of a sudden he plays it back with the stuff, with him playing the saxophone. That to me, that explained everything really quickly.
But he takes apart the phone.
but he takes the phone apart.
Right.
So, I mean, but the thing is that the thing, even though he like played it off like bullshit at the convention, Moran's device might be an actual thing.
Yeah.
So, and it didn't, the way he described it, it did not require the phone on the receiving end to have any alteration.
That's interesting.
Oh,
wow. You just have to know the number.
Yeah. You have to know the number and then do the harmonica thing. So I'm still like on the fence, but I think that's what it was. However, most other people seem to think that the device is in the saxophone itself.
Oh, it's the only thing he doesn't take apart.
Yeah.
Which he doesn't take apart. Yeah.
That would be a terrible place to put a bug, though. You wouldn't hear anything. Yeah.
You just have to adjust the level way down. That's all.
But that does, if you're thinking conspiracy brain, the Moran thing, I forgot that was that they said it doesn't have to alter the device, because I thought that was out as soon as he takes apart the thing. But of course, like the woman who Moran is working with to show off the wares is like used by Harrison Ford to get the tapes. So like it's all connected, man.
Yeah. He maybe
I think Harrison Ford hired Moran.
Yeah.
And the whole time,
and that's why they're
Moran's
pushing so hard. They're like asking for all his secrets. They're trying to hang out with him. She's hitting on him so hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Maybe actually, you know what? Maybe I'm going to hang out with that guy on the grassy knoll. I think now I'm back to conspiracy theories.
Oh my God.
No, I thought there was no bug. But there's also the final pan.
Oh man, that's great. Yeah.
The security campaign.
So, the security campaign where, after Harry has totally destroyed his entire apartment and there's a huge pile of debris on one side of the room, and like all of his possessions are completely obliterated, including the like sacred, Mary doll that he had that he tore apart with his bare hands.
Yep.
All this stuff is just piled up, and the camera does this amazing slow pan all the way over to the left and then back to the right and then back to the left again in one shot.
Yep.
And it eventually ends on like a view out the window with the lamp in the middle or something like that. But Coppola's vision for that obviously was to reflect, surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's being surveyed, and you have, this view of his entire life is totally destroyed and everything's in shambles, and and he's being watched on top of that.
I think it's also cool because it's what is watching him, us, the viewer, the audience, and the camera is. What is a camera in a narrative fiction film? It's invisible. It's this thing that the character will never see, because they can never recognize that thing. And so
it's uncontrolled exhibition.
Yeah.
And we're all the voyeurs.
And we're the voyeur.
Whatever's going on.
Yeah. That is very cool. I think like it does make, it does implicate the audience in that kind of Hanekanian way of like, we are, in a way that, of course, as we mentioned, Hitchcock does with Rear Window as well. A lot. And so it's not like new to Coppola, but I think it is very much, it is very much.
It's refined.
Yeah. There's this,
it's
a doubling of the,
So linguistics.
Yes.
Yeah. Justin, can you explain this to us?
Okay, so let's start out with, I'll say the line the two ways, and then I'm going to ask you what do you think the meaning is in the two different ways?
You can do a flipped classroom.
Yeah, flipped classroom, and then I'll give you my very rough explanation of what I think is happening, but it's not satisfying because I don't feel like I found or could think of a satisfying explanation of how we figured this out. As like humans who understand English, we know it automatically that there's a difference in the meaning here, but exactly why there is that difference is eluded me. So here's the first way he hears the line. This is, Harry Cole is eavesdropping on these two people, and the one guy says to the lady, he'd kill us if he gets the chance.
He'd kill us if he got the chance.
All right. And then at the end of the movie, he hears the line this way. He'd kill us if he got the chance.
Do you think we can do this?
Later in the week. Sunday, maybe.
Sunday, definitely.
Jaguar Hotel. 3 o'clock. Room 773. He'd kill us if he got the chance.
Okay, so I put it to you guys, what the first way, what do you think? I mean, we've already sort of said this, but like, what do you think they're talking about? I mean, what do you think the plan? Because remember, they're talking about like going to a hotel room, blah blah blah, Jack Paar Hotel, and all that. So what do you think? Like, what do we fill in as audience members? The first one.
The first one, I feel like they're afraid for their lives. Like they're in an affair, and they think that they may be in danger if the director finds out. Harry Cole feels that if he gives the director that information, that in fact the director will act upon that.
And then where are they going to the hotel?
Just as a rendezvous, I had thought like they were just gonna like meet up to have
like an affair.
Have an affair.
My assumption as well.
But now Harry Cole's worried that if the director has the details of their room number and time, that he may show up and make trouble.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately the setup. Is the whole situation is a setup for the director?
Yeah,
but we'll get to that.
Right. So that's how I interpreted it until the turn in the movie.
I agree.
I actually heard it a little bit more. I wanted to read a little bit more into it, partly because I was like, well, why would he say he'd kill us if he got the chance? Like, what is the preceding bit of discourse that we don't hear? Right? We're filling something in. What is the thing that immediately precedes that? And I was thinking it's something like, we need to run. We need to get out of here.
Because
he'd kill us if he got the chance. Like, we need to not give him the chance to kill us.
I see. So it's not just like an afternoon tryst.
Yeah,
it's
you
like
might think
we're getting out.
We're
of here.
absconding. Like we're getting out. That's kind of what I was thinking. Okay, but then now let's flip it. So here's the other read. He'd kill us if he got the chance.
Well, they're setting up a situation where they know that the director will hear that audio. And well, they don't know that he'll hear that line,
right?
But they know that they are being watched and that they're suspected by the director, and it's likely that they are being recorded. And so, I mean, he obviously says like Jack Tar Hotel Sunday, whatever p.m.
Yep.
So that he meets them there and he confronts them, and which he eventually does with the audio from that conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
And which again gives them the opportunity to then
take him out.
Yeah, but the change in emphasis.
Let him go and die in a car accident.
Right.
Yeah. But the change in emphasis flipped it from thinking like we are the victims and we're afraid to
like, we're the perpetrator.
We're the perpetrators. Like he would kill us if he got the chance, and therefore we are going to take actions to get the jump on him.
That's the thing. So,
yes.
So the magic of it is that what the difference in emphasis is doing is it's helping us as English speakers reconstruct what they probably were talking about right before he said that line, which we don't hear. And I think you're right, Laura. It has to be, or both of you, is that it has to be something like we should kill him or we have to kill him because he'd kill us if he got the chance.
Yeah, like the clock's ticking. Like they've got to do something.
Exactly. And now I couldn't figure out why that is. Okay, so why is it that when you have emphasis on he'd and us, it calls to mind the inverse, the reverse, us kill him in the way that we just specified. We need to kill him. Okay, so there's a couple things here that I'm just going to sketch a few things, but I don't have a good answer here. But so there is, independently of this, you can use this kind of contrastive focus to indicate that you're resolving a pronoun in a way that's unusual. So I'll give you an example. So if I say, Paul called Jim a Republican, then he insulted him. Who's insulting who? Paul, the guy who called Jim a Republican, is insulting Jim, right? The order of the he and him goes with the order of subject and object from the previous discourse. But if you flip the accent, if you do the contrastive accent, it flips it. So if you say, Paul called Jim a Republican, then he insulted him. It flips it. So now you flip the order of the two. So that's one interesting just like fact. And some people have, there's an argument in linguistics about why exactly.
Paul's a jerk.
Yeah, exactly. But there's an argument about why that is, but that's not quite what we're doing here, because what we're doing here is not what is called anaphora resolution, resolving what the pronouns refer to. We're doing something else. So I was thinking it's more like this. So if I say, if you just heard out of the blue, somebody say, she kissed him, what that calls to mind is that someone has raised the possibility of the opposite, that he kissed her. So here's two ways this discourse could go. You could imagine somebody asking, did Bill kiss Sue? And somebody saying, no, she kissed him. That's one way you could hear it. So the possibility of the inverse has been raised. Another way is somebody could just say, Bill kissed Sue. And then the other person say, no, she kissed him. All right, so the flipping again. So that's what I think is going on, is that in the prior discourse, here's how I could understand their discourse. We should kill him. He would kill us if he had the chance. That discourse makes sense, right? It's sort of, we're flipping the thing that we previously said, and that's what the accent is helping to sort of indicate.
Right.
Notice that this doesn't make any sense. We should run. He would kill us if he had the chance. That doesn't make any sense. That's such a strange thing to say.
Yeah.
Because, right, as opposed to we should run, he would kill us if he had the chance. That makes sense. And so I think it's something like that, of this congruence between the previous discourse, and it has something to do with this parallelism between he kills us kill him, and that's what's being flipped by the focal stress. But I don't have any explanation of why that works. But what I think is so fascinating about all this is that every English speaker in the audience gets it immediately. You get it instantly.
Yeah.
You understand it just as an English speaker immediately, that there's a flip. Maybe you filled the blank in differently. You know, we all filled it in slightly differently, but you get that there's that immediate difference, and it takes a lot.
But the antagonist is like, I mean, everybody understood that part.
Yeah, everyone got that. Who's the protagonist? Who's the antagonist, or whatever? Who's the being attacked, and who's doing the attacking? But what I think is so interesting is that already it took me an hour just to get to this, of just looking at research on focus and realizing there's not really anything on this that I could draw on, and it takes so much conscious intellectual effort to unpack this thing that we process as humans instantly. And that's basically why I find linguistics fascinating. That's all of linguistics is just like doing this thing that we're like effortless, we can understand instantly, and then just sitting down and trying to figure out why.
Well, and especially in the English language, there is just so much that's inferred, or like you're saying, is a direct function of just some minor inflection of a word or a syllable.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why English is such a difficult language for non-English speakers to learn, because there's just so much nuance in the tone of voice you use, and like the way you end a sentence, you know, let alone really basic things like the fact that a lot of other languages don't even have plurals and things like that. But, you know, English, like you're saying, in this particular instance, there would have been a whole lead up to that particular line.
Yeah.
And as English speakers, we just assume that it was a function of whatever came before.
Yeah.
And like, I didn't even, until you brought this up, I'd never even thought of that before.
Yeah. But this is
I just make the assumption.
Yeah, exactly. We just assume automatically, and we're not consciously interrogating it. But that's what we're doing. And I feel relatively confident that it's because we implicitly made that assumption that allowed us to infer the like who's attacking who thing. That's the thing that we ultimately all get to. We get there in slightly different ways, but it's by way of this kind of this crux of, well, we're just inferring what came prior to that in the discourse. And I will say one other thing about this is that pretty much we're doing this all the time. So we're only ever really consciously aware of, like, I don't know, some small percentage of what people are saying. We're always, the discourse is kind of cutting in and out. You're half paying attention and stuff. So you're always reconstructing. We're constantly doing this, reconstructing, oh yeah, well, what were they saying there? Or what did they mean by this thing? Oh, they must have been presupposing this other thing. We're constantly like going back and relitigating earlier parts of the conversation and re-understanding them in light of what's coming later in the conversation. It's just a constant thing that we do automatically as speakers, native speakers of a language. And anyway, I just find this stuff fascinating. This is an amazing and brilliant distillation of all of
simple.
This. It's so simple and yet so complex.
Yeah,
exactly.
When I was mixing the film, Francis was off in Godfather 2 shooting in New York, and I was mixing the film, but in the back of my mind thinking always, how can we help this process? And then out of the blue, I remembered a recording that I had made with Fred Forrest and Cindy Williams, who play the couple in the conversation. And I'd recorded a wild track, a separate track of them saying the conversation. And they and I went out with a Nagra, or tape recorder, to another park in San Francisco, but in a residential area where there was no noise or interference. And they just walked around the park, and I walked in front of them recording the conversation. So they said their lines and I recorded it with them actually walking. So you get the effort of them moving, so it doesn't sound artificial. On the third take, Fred said, instead of he'd kill us if he had the chance, he said he'd kill us if he had the chance. So the emphasis was different. And I remember noting in my notebook, the third take is the wrong reading of the line. But in the middle of mixing the film, I thought, I'm going to find that reading. Where is that reading? And so I dug around in the old tapes and came up with this third take. And I transferred that and put it in the film at the very end of the film, when Harry is realizing that those two kids are still alive and they've taken over the business, and the Robert Duvall character is dead, seemingly in an accident. What's going on? And in the middle of all that, the line gets replayed, he'd kill us if he had the chance, which implies, therefore, we have to kill him. And you don't even know who he really is or what their relationship is with him. That's all deliberately undernourished plot information. Is she his wife? Maybe. She could be his daughter. We just don't know. And that's a deliberate strategy on Francis's part. Anyway, I mixed that in and flew to New York with this version of the film and played the mix for Francis. And I prepared Francis ahead of time, and I said, I changed the rules here at the end, and we have this different reading of the line. And at the end, he said, no, I like it. Leave it in.
Yeah. I was thinking movies too, like draw on the way our brains fill in that information. That's how like the visual language of films relies on that.
Yes.
And it's like a combination
Exactly.
of like drawing on what we already do, but like it's drawing on like how we've read images for, thousands of years, iconography wise, but also like and drawing on the way that like our brains work, like you said, with the J cut,
The J cut,
right.
yeah.
With like
or even just like the tropes you see in movies.
Yep.
Right. But some of it is also constructed as
some of it is conventional.
Right.
That's
like
right.
in the beginning of filmmaking, like they created like some of the film language that we now unconsciously take for granted the way that we do in our language with the emphasis thing, and we don't even like process it anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
The whole nature of filmmaking and editing is, it's something that's been slowly constructed over time.
Yeah.
Like if you would have seen, I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen old movies from like the 20s and 30s. They're super janky and weird to watch because there's no established like visual language and let alone sound cuts, which is a thing that happens later on. The language of even just the ability to project something using that particular medium is an art in itself.
Yep.
And again, like films in the 19th century, like early movies, they were just, people didn't even know what to shoot. They would just like shoot a dog walking down the sidewalk. And people would go to a theater and pay 50 cents or whatever they would pay, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, this is so amazing." Whereas later on, the idea of actually telling a story through this medium became a thing, and then it develops organically over time and stylistically over time, and as a result of technological change as well.
I mean, what we're watching, weirdly, I think, is the evolution of a kind of language. It's not quite language, but it's an evolution of a kind of conventionality about how to tell stories with this visual medium. That's happening in slow motion, because language evolution actually happens quite quickly. You get language innovation every year. There's new words added to the dictionary. There's, I guess.
Well, existing words change their meaning.
Existing words change their meaning. And we can innovate this like right here in this conversation. We could innovate and make up a roughly a new language that builds off of English very quickly. It's not hard to establish these new things on the fly. You can kind of make sense of what I'm doing, even if I just started, speaking gibberish all of a sudden. But what's interesting in with this filmmaking is you're seeing this process evolving organically in slow motion over the course of 120 years or something. So And I think that's cool. And it's a universal language in a way, right? It's I hesitate to use the word language here because that's actually controversial, but these conventions are quasi universal in that
it's more universal than just speaking English or French or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's more accessible to people because it's a visual medium.
Yeah.
But even more than that, you know, like the sound effects you use create mood, and like the music you use creates mood, and those are universal aspects of filmmaking and film editing that speak to everyone.
That's what I think is.
You know, you could watch a German film and like not know what the hell they're talking about, but you could sort of vaguely follow the plot based on like the feel of the music and, you know, the way that you're pushed through it.
Yeah. And without any language too, you might be able to tell how much time has passed or like just by the way that they're cutting.
Yeah. I mean, I do find it interesting because unlike human language, this is more a point of disanalogy. A lot of the conventions of film, have as their basis natural signifiers, so to speak. So like, you know, screechy violins, scary, and calming music, happy or whatever, right? Those things, and like you know, you have all these natural signifiers that you can draw on. You know, jarring cuts, like staccato kind of quick cuts, like chaos.
It's a language.
Right, but that's not conventional. That's just like we are humans, and this kind of comes about. Whereas, like, think about like the words we use. That's totally conventional. There's no relationship between like, you know, dog and the dogs. That's just like totally. And every language has a different word for that. There are very few words which have that kind of natural one, like some onomatopoeia maybe, or like, you know, these things. Those are like the few kind of things which they really immediately sound or evoke the very thing there. But there's very little of that. So film in that way is unlike language, and it's drawing a lot on non-conventional things and conventionalizing them to tell, you know, to do this sort of, you know, co-opting them in these narrative ways.
Yeah, that's the fascinating thing I find about filmmaking is that as it's gone through time, is that the language of filmmaking has developed, obviously, and it's all contextual. You know, the very fact that we associate screeching violins with danger is because of Psycho. Yeah. and the very fact that we associate like quick cuts is because of like action movies and thrillers from like the 50s and 60s, because they felt that doing that would speak to a certain kind of lizard brain feel. Yeah. And so that has become associated with that emotion and that feeling.
Reinforced.
Exactly. It's a self-feeding, it's a cycle that kind of feeds
itself. That's right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think nowhere is this clearer. I think the clearest example of this is like that we settled on 24 frames per second as like the medium, because there's something about 24 which feels like it's lifelike, but not so lifelike.
Not too lifelike.
Yeah, exactly. And then it just became conventional. It could have been 25, it could have been 23, but for some reason.
In France, it is 25.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But you know, it could have been a little more, a little less. But once you get beyond that, once you get into like, you know, get up to the 60s, it starts to look real weird to us.
My God.
Yeah. We start to see
it's like uncanny valley territory. Exactly. Yeah. Bizarre.
It's too the motion is too smooth. It's and so, but that is itself somewhat conventionalized, you know, like it's a mixture of the two. And so exactly, teasing out how much of that is conventionalized and how much of it is just purely the lizard brainy stuff, I think is an interesting a question. Definitely. And you know, and you do wonder. I mean, I think there are some filmmakers, like I believe Ang Lee believes that, you know, 24 was just like a weird thing we hit on.
Somebody just put a stake in the ground. Yeah. It's like, whatever.
And it's like, we could have easily been 60. 60 could have been easily been
120 plus is what Ang thinks.
Well, and Ang thinks it should be even higher. But I mean, if you think about it, I mean, there was other reasons going for 24 rather than 60, which is that film it costs money. And like nobody, you know, like, but besides those economic things, you know, Ang, I think, is thinking like, if economic things weren't a factor, maybe our eyes would have preferred 60. Who knows? We will never know.
Gemini Man was 100. How much was
Gemini Man was 120, but we saw it in 60.
That's right. It was 120. I forgot
120.
About that. Robert, can
we will never see it in
funny
120. Story,
but that was the last movie that we saw together in theaters because you know, we had a kid and everything. And so we were like, look, we got to see Gemini Man in as high a frame rate 3D as we can, because this is like the last chance we're going to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And so we went and saw it, and it was an empty theater. We saw it like 1 p.m, completely empty theater. And it was a weird experience.
So weird.
It's very weird.
Yeah.
3D.
That would have been super trippy.
3D 60 frames per second is kind of
It's wild.
Unbelievably wild. Like
you settle into it though. Like, but the first 30 minutes though, I was just making like noises like all the time.
It's jarring at first, but what's really cool about it, it's not just that it's like, oh, look at this, it's so stupid, it looks like a soap opera. But what's really cool is that the 3D looks more real than it does in 24, because it breaks that kind of, it looks like, it's been described by other people this way, but it looks like you're looking through the screen and seeing like a world,
like an actual space.
Yeah, an actual space. And that is
fascinating.
Very strange. And I never got that feeling with, I mean, maybe a little bit with when I saw Avatar in 3D in a theater.
You know what the first 3D movie I ever saw was? Captain EO at Disneyland. Which was a Coppola film.
Amazing.
Yeah, there was, I don't know if you guys know what that was, but there was a ride. It was a ride. It was an experience at Disneyland that was in like the mid 80s, where Michael Jackson was supposed to be like I can't even remember. He was like a space alien captain.
I saw this on Coppola's filmography when I was looking at it. I was like, that's bizarre. Okay, please.
It was super weird. There were like Muppets and shit in it. It was really bizarre. But all I remember is it was the first time I ever saw a 3D film, and I must have been like, I don't know, 8 at the time or something. I don't know. And I had to like take the glasses off.
So intense.
Because it was so, and that was just a 24 frame. So, technology.
It is interesting. I think I probably saw, it must have been one of those that I saw, not that one, but that was my first 3D, because I saw one of the like Muppet ones in 3D or something.
Oh, nice.
At Disney World. But Avatar was a very strange experience and really cool.
Avatar's, it's, it has its benefits and also its issues.
Yeah, totally.
But, it's a pretty amazing film.
It's really cool in theaters. We watched it at home, and because Laura had never seen it, and it's not the same movie.
No.
You
have to watch in a theater.
So weird. I never. Okay, let's get back on track.
I want to make sure we get to the location scouting.
We got a location.
Because I may turn into a pumpkin, fairly quickly. So I'm not trying to
through that.
I'm not trying to rush you, Roger.
No.
I don't want you to rush you at all. I want to make sure you give it its full due.
All right, so Robert, take us through San Francisco. Take us on a tour of San Francisco in the various shots in this movie in 1974.
Okay, so again, I lived in the city for a very long time, and long enough anyway. I have literally been or have walked past or am relatively intimately familiar with most of the locations in this movie.
Hell yeah.
So we'll start with the first one, Harry's shop. Now it's an old brick building down at 16th and Rhode Island in Potrero. It's I think it's like a design company is there now, and in the movie, you look in the room and there's just like brick and wooden columns, and that's it.
Yep.
This is obviously pre-89 quake. There's no reinforcing anywhere. The building is super unsafe. They made a lot of changes after that, and I saw there's a couple websites where they went through all the locations and took like current photos and ones then. And that particular location used to be right next to a spur line for the Western Pacific Railroad, which used to have a tunnel that ran through Potrero Hill. And in 1962, the tunnel caught fire and collapsed.
Wow.
And a bunch of houses like fell into the holes. So when you see Harry like walking across the railroad tracks to go into the building, that's what the tracks are.
Oh,
and they obviously aren't there anymore. They took those out like in the 80s.
Wow.
So there's that location. There's also Harry's apartment. And so a bit of trivia. I did not know this until I was doing the research for this podcast, but I have been in that building.
Really?
And,
oh my God.
Yeah. Geez.
Where is it?
It's 700 Laguna. It's in like Hayes Valley-ish. It's like Lower Fillmore, Hayes Valley. It's closer to Hayes Valley. So about, now it would have been 12 years ago. I was looking for a new apartment and was checking out a bunch of places, and there was an ad for an apartment in that building. And I went, and I know that building, and I know that that's the building because I remember it being really odd that there were just tons of garages on the bottom floor. There's just like garage door after garage door, and I know where the building is, and I looked it up on Google Maps, and I'm like, yep, that's the place. And I remember it being really dark on the inside, and like the hallways were super tiny. And, I remember it just feeling really claustrophobic, which is funny considering, all of the themes of the movie.
Yeah.
There used to be a freeway that went through that whole neighborhood that they tore down in like the 90s, early 2000s. And after that, it like completely got upscaled and gentrified. Oh, man. Okay. So Union Square.
Yes.
So my last job was as basically as the project art department. I was a photographer, videographer, graphic designer for the Central Subway project in San Francisco, which is a new subway that they are still building. After it's like years behind schedule at this point. But one of the stations, the new subway stations, is in Union Square. And so I would go down to Union Square constantly to, check out the station and take photos and do whatever I was doing for my job. In addition to that, I've been to Union Square many times for other reasons, because it's one of the sort of preeminent shopping locations in the city. And so I would literally, like, I've skateboarded in Union Square. Like I've been on dates there. In fact, the first time I actually came to San Francisco by myself, I went to Union Square in 1999, and it was before they renovated the square. So it actually looked like it did in the movie in 1974 or 73. With like the hedges and the grass and everything. In, I want to say, the early 2000s, when Willie Brown was mayor, he went on a whole like city sort of upscaling initiative where they were building new parks, and they were trying to like fix up parts of the city. And one of the things that they did was they completely demolished Union Square, and they rebuilt it all as this sort of big corporate plaza now, where you can like, it's basically, there's a huge open space in the middle of the plaza, and you can have like an ice skating rink and other stuff. But it completely removed the sort of old school feel that you had that is represented in this movie. Like, it's completely gone.
I have a story about the Westin St. Francis, which is the hotel that I believe the
convention's held at.
The convention is held at, exactly, which is right off of Union Square.
It's right off of Square.
So not every, but the last 10 years, several times they've had the Pacific APA in San Francisco. And whenever they have the Pacific APA, by the way, the APA, is the American Philosophical Association. It's one of 3 annual meetings of a bunch of philosophers. And they have it in that hotel in Westin St. Francis. So I've stayed in that hotel many times, and there are lots, I've been in those conference rooms and given talks in them and so on. Nice. One time we were back in San Francisco. I don't remember if it was around when we visited and hung out with you. It might have been, actually.
I think it was.
So we had just, you'd given us like an architectural tour. Maybe we went to that, sandwich place. Okay, and then after we said goodbye to you because you had to get back to work, we walked around for a bit, and then I got like super dehydrated, and so I like suddenly had like a really bad headache, and I was like nauseated, and I didn't really know what to do. But we were close to Union Square, so I was like, all right, let's just drop into the Westin, because I know the hotel really well. We can just like camp out in this part of the hotel, and I'll like get my bearings. And then Laura had to like go to like get Advil or something.
You were like having the vapors on like on a chaise lounge or something. And so I had to go get like a bottle of water and like a $7 blister packet of Advil or something from the hotel gift shop to like revive my husband.
I had to get revived.
I don't know. We've been like walking around for too long.
I just didn't drink enough water.
I can't go on. And
anyway, so
that's amazing.
Yeah, that happened right after.
Yeah, like it was just funny. We were like looking at as soon as they showed the Westin, Justin and I looked at each other, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's where you had your headache."
Yeah, that's where
you got the vapors.
That's like what Union Square is like going to make us think about now,
so
forever
funny.
and ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, every time it's funny, every single time, I shit you not, for many years now, I've walked through the square. I've always done one of two things. I've either said he'd kill us if he got the chance, or I've hummed the "When the Red Robin Goes bobbing along," the song that the band is playing to myself as I walk through, just as like a little treat.
That is why you are our guest on this episode, Robert. I just think
because I'm that much of a dork.
It's great. No one loves this movie more than you, and that includes us, who we really love this movie. So
we do.
It's really that's incredible.
Well, I mean, in addition to everything that we're talking about, just San Francisco, Now, I grew up in Oregon and I moved to San Francisco for a lot of reasons because, the place itself and what it had to offer at the time really spoke to me as a person. And so, and I got very involved in a lot of communities there, and I still have like hundreds of friends that live there. And so it's, even though the city that I love really doesn't exist anymore, it's still, sort of my chosen home. And, that's something that I carry through my life.
That is really cool. But it's also, it's melancholy because it is, you can't really go back to the place that it's not the same. Yeah. And
it's kind of one of those things where you have to sort of attempt to rectify it for yourself because you know for a fact that you can never go back to whatever you consider quote unquote home.
Yeah.
Because it literally, in my case, like the minute I moved out of that apartment, the place I lived in was demolished.
Yeah.
And so, and like that, and the fact that, the culture in the city has changed and the economics of the entire Bay Area have changed so that like working class people can't live there anymore.
Well, when you watch a movie like this and you're like, damn.
Yeah. Well, and
1970s
that's like one of
the,
that's one of the big points of this film for me personally is that like the city that you see like being born in this while this movie was being filmed is the one that I got to know when I first moved to San Francisco, and it was on its way out when I moved there. And now it's, this like hyper capitalist tech center.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a bit of trivia that might seem trivial, but actually I think it's kind of interesting and is weirdly woven into the movie in an interesting way. So Harry Caul, his last name is spelled Caul. That was actually not intended to be that way. So originally it was supposed to be Harry Caul, Call, like literally like you call on the phone and he's going to bug you kind of thing. So I guess Coppola dictated this and the transcriptionist wrote down, she thought it was Caul. And when Coppola saw it at first, he was like, nah, that's wrong. But then he realized, he's like, you know what? This is actually better. It's better for two reasons. One is that it's not so on the nose like Call. But the other thing is that a call is something. So apparently a call it's a part of the amniotic sac that a fetus lives in. And apparently some babies are born of the call, which means they're born with part of the amniotic sac over their head.
Oh, wow.
And this is where the word cowl comes from. And what is a cowl but a thing you hide your face behind, right? It's like a hood that you use to hide your face. And so Coppola realized this and he thought, that's actually like way better, like happy accident. You can have this play into the theme of this character who wants to hide himself. He's born of the call, so to speak. And, he's this guy who needs privacy in a kind of weird, obsessive way. That brings me to this other thing, which I was kind of curious about, and I didn't have much time to really investigate or think about. But, most Americans value privacy. They think privacy is this somehow closely, almost inalienable sort of right that we have. But you might wonder.
Well, they say they do.
Well, they say yes. I mean, it's a stated thing, but it lies at the part of like, I think it's somehow part of like human nature that we desire to have a kind of private part of our lives. But I was wondering why that is. Why is it that, let's just suppose it does matter, but why does privacy matter? And I was curious if like off the cuff, you guys had any thoughts about this, because it is, when you start to think about it, it's kind of interesting why you might think is there, first of all, a unique right to privacy. Some people think there isn't. It's just subsumed under other rights we have. But is there, what would be the sort of reason we think privacy is valuable? I mean, because here's one answer. One answer is, well, no, we want to have control over our lives. So it's like, it's just about control. It's like you want to be able to control, like what you eat for lunch. And the same way you want to be able to control what other people know about you.
And that speaks to, I think, you can argue either way on this, but I think it speaks to a certain degree to survival. Mm-hmm. If you can't choose what you're eating, or if you can't choose what risks you take in your own life, or what risks you put like your loved ones against your loved ones, those that again speaks to sort of the survival instincts that we have. It speaks to that lizard brain of like, I can't control anything about my life, and therefore my fate is just kind of a big who knows, and like, why do I even exist at that point?
That's really interesting. So to elaborate on that a little bit, so maybe you think like it in a way, it's like Harry Call. We all have this desire to engage in personal interactions with other people where we share information with them that could compromise us in various respects, because that's just this deep human need. We need to connect to other people. And the way we connect to other people is we sort of share our insecurities and whatever, our vulnerabilities and that kind of thing. The good of privacy then is being able to facilitate the kind of sharing with just who you selectively who you want to share with, which then allows you to form those kind of interpersonal relationships. That's the good of privacy, is it sort of is
and it makes it a commodity too, for like that. Therefore, that intimacy is valued because it's not those details of yourself are not shared with just anybody.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So then, it makes it more valuable.
That's what I meant.
And especially
commodity.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, and especially in capitalist democracies, that's a culturally that's highly valued. The right to be able to self-determination, to be able to make your own choices in life, in theory, to be able to sort of make your way through whatever decisions you're going to make in your life, to have whatever riches or career or friends and family you want, versus living in a society that again, this is all sort of on paper, but that isn't free. You don't have those choices, and you don't have that level of self-determination or control over your own well-being.
So one answer, which is I think what we're circling around, is that it creates the possibility of interpersonal bonding, because that's a finite resource, and so you're sharing it only with the people who you want to share it with. If it was every time you forge a personal bond, you were forming a bond with everyone, it wouldn't be a personal bond. And so it facilitates the control you have to be able to form bonds with the people who you want to form bonds with.
Well, and bonds are formed on trust too.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, what if Harry Call was forced to be friends with Bernie Moran? He'd be miserable.
Yeah.
And most people would if they were friends with him.
That guy sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
We choose the people in our lives for a reason, because they either
they reciprocate.
They reciprocate, or they bring things to us that we appreciate, or they, are good foils for us to be able to make better decisions for ourselves, or whatever. They make us feel better about ourselves. I mean, there's a million different reasons why we have friends, right? Or associates. So
there's a flip side to this.
There's a flip side to that coin,
which is that what the privacy is allowing us to do is allowing us to control the negative reactions people have towards us. And so this is the thing.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Too.
Do you want to get into that, Elon?
Well, no, because we were talking about this earlier today, so I was anticipating. But I think that's one. I think the things that I'm most private about, or want to keep my privacy around, are things that I am embarrassed about, or afraid that people will judge me for or shame me for.
Yeah.
So I think, like in many respects of my life, I am an open book. I think I'm not a particularly private person, but the things that I choose to be private about, I may be embarrassed about or worried that you'll just draw some poor, reflection or inference about me.
Yeah.
So because we talked about this, Justin, because we were wondering if it makes a difference if a human being is collecting data on you versus a computer. Like if a computer doesn't have any judgment about those details, does it still feel like a violation of privacy? Like knowing that Google is recording it every time I ask a weird medical question into, the search bar at 3 a.m.,
now everyone knows, but yeah.
Damn it. I told you I didn't want to have a podcast. Anyway.
And now you're getting ads for podcasts on Facebook. Yeah. I mean, all of this is contextual, right? Like any perceived imperfections that we have they're held back because, again, you're afraid of somebody else perceiving them in the wrong light, or without all the information that they would need to have in order to make an accurate judgment, right? And that's all based completely on context. And if you remove the context, then what are any of us?
Yeah, that's true. I think that's right in that but I think we also fear that even with the context, someone will just judge us either way, even if they didn't have even if they have the full context, they're assholes out there. Right. And you're just you know what? I just don't trust them. Yeah. And I don't want them to have that information about me, because they're going to judge me, and I don't want to deal with that, that them having that attitude towards me. I think it's an interesting idea. But anyway, we've hit on two different things. One is that it allows the creation of personal relationships, but it also allows the, creation of barriers between personal conflicts, so to speak. And not really, that's not the right word, but, personal judgment.
People curate their own sort of, like what they want to project to other people. And that's perceived in a very, that's done because somebody knows that a certain mannerism or a certain way of speaking or a certain decision that they make is going to be perceived a very specific way. Yeah. And people that are really, really, really good at that are psychopaths.
Yes.
But I mean, the thing is that like, it's part of the human condition, and it's part of like human interaction to do that on a daily basis, because you can't just allow random whatever to fall into your life, because there's risk out there, and there's people that are malicious, and there's, forces in, especially in any kind of power structure, where people want to hold power over you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, related to this, and it's something that we're only going to be able to touch on briefly, is the theme of religion in this movie, which looms large over everything. But one of the things, and both you and I, Robert, as lapsed Catholics, know better than others, is the degree to which shame is an important, and guilt are important elements of Catholicism and affecting how you see the world. And I was thinking a little bit about how shame and guilt, which are these things we try to avoid by being private, are also bound up with religiosity. What's the connection there between the sort of Catholic outlook, or even just the general religious outlook, and things like increased degrees of shame or guilt about things that you might feel? About things, actions you might have taken. And one idea, just to connect back to the broader theme of this movie, is that if you are a Catholic, or really if you are any kind of believer in a personal deity, you believe there is an entity which sees everything and is never seen. It's in a way the ultimate Harry Call, right? The guy who's an ultimate eavesdropper, invades all of our privacy. It's like Santa Claus writ large, knows everything that we're doing, naughty or nice. And we're constantly being watched in our worst moments. And so we feel guilty about that. And yet this being is itself irreproachable, because we can't, access them at all. We can't touch them. We can't. So we know nothing about them. And that's an important part of a lot of, of the various theodicies, is that, look, God's mysterious. He's got a plan. You don't know what is going on there. It's beyond your understanding, mere mortal.
Right. The nature of faith as a concept.
Yeah, you have to have faith. And so there's this asymmetric relationship that mirrors exactly the asymmetric relationship of Harry Call to the couple, right? He has this power over them by infringing in their lives in this way where he knows about them, but they don't know about him. They don't know anything about him. He is God in a way. Yeah.
Amy too, he tries to have that really. He can't.
By controlling.
Not have it personal. Yeah, right. Well, and he wants to know everything about her. He probably does, tapping her phone. She says, I sometimes think that you're listening to me on the phone. I think he is.
100%.
And he's looming outside her, outside of her door and stuff. Creeper. But then she says, do you have siblings? And he's like, I gotta go.
Yeah.
And like that's the relationship he wants to try and have and call that love. And it doesn't work.
No.
It's not a relationship.
No, it's exactly.
And he misses the point. Like, he doesn't understand that there, a relationship is a certain it exists in a box with certain defined attributes, and he's not meeting any of those.
No.
Yep. Yeah, because he's never, for exactly to Laura's point earlier, he's not confiding anything personal in her. So
exactly.
there's no
sharing
of any. Yeah.
So I did not grow up Catholic. But I did dabble in evangelicalism because I went to this very intense Bible, basically Jesus camp as a kid. Right. And I remember they sat us down and they were like, all right, this water is your soul. And then they put food coloring and they would drop in food drops for every, a drop for every sin. Right. And including not respecting your parents.
Yeah, like swearing.
Swearing, right? Stuff that I'm like, oh my God, I did this twice already today. I just did it now. I just blasphemed. I just blasphemed, right? And I'm just like sitting there. They're using the different colors, right? So there's blue mixing with red. It's just turning like this horrible, muddy purple color. And I'm like, that is my soul, and I'm going to hell. And then they took some bleach and they put the bleach in, and the water went clear again. And they're like, that is like when you confess your sins to God. But you have to confess all of them. And I'm like, how am I going to confess all of them? I don't remember all of them. I'm definitely going to hell. I came home and I was just like, Mom, my water is so dirty and I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
But there is that too.
But you didn't drink bleach, which is what's important.
Yeah, you didn't drink it.
But like, it's interesting that like the piece of confession, right? Because that is like the only time Harry, he has this need to confess in his dreams, right? He wants to have that intimacy, but he also has this like religious compulsion to confess. It's the only way to absolution is to say the things out loud.
You have to say it out loud. That's right. It's a vocalization.
Exactly.
There's a kind of ritualistic element of that. And we were musing on this a little bit earlier. I don't know if this is right, but there is a feeling I have when as soon as you vocalize a thought that you've been kind of batting around in your mind, somehow it becomes more real. It becomes more something you become committed to. And I think it has something to do with the fact that once you vocalize, you are committing publicly to other people, even if it's just yourself, because you're talking to yourself, to sort of that being true. So you're committing to defend it, to provide evidence in favor of it. You're reifying it in a way that it wasn't before. Before you said it, it was still your thought, but you didn't vocalize it. So somehow that privacy allows you to like be like, well, I never had that thought or something.
Mm-hmm.
You allows you to deny it or something. I don't know.
Well, and a lot of thoughts when you have a thought can be a number of things. It can be a number of thoughts muddled together. Mm-hmm. And once you actually vocalize it and you say it out loud, it becomes concrete.
Yeah.
It becomes something it's almost like you can't undo it. And it becomes that much more intense as a result. And so you have to either commit or say, oh, man, that really does not sound like how it sounded in my head. I need to think about this some more and clarify.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's interesting that there's this component of, confession being a ritualization of this, this thing that we do kind of already.
Yeah.
Should we, I think I want to make a nomination here of what we can do to kind of wrap it up.
Okay.
Which is we like to end on a kind of, just a fun sort of what do we like kind of thing. So one way to go is to think, what's our favorite Coppola film? That's one kind of very easy one to go for. Another one is like, favorite like psychological thriller or whatever, or paranoia thriller would be another one. So yeah, should we sort of end on that, or is there other things we wanted to?
I mean, I don't know that I have a thriller, like a paranoid thriller off the top of my head.
Okay, so let's just talk Coppola for a second, and I think he's an interesting director in that he makes 4 movies which I think are unassuageably regarded as masterpieces, or at least close to masterpieces. We're talking Godfather 1, The Conversation, Godfather 2, Apocalypse Now. Those are sort of the 4 that, and they're all in the 70s. They're all in short, right next to each other. He has a very, interesting career after that. He makes a lot of movies that I think people think are quite slight. He makes some comedies. He makes some weird experimental films. But I think the kind of common consensus is he never really tops those 4. I'm curious for you guys if you would say one of those 4 is your favorite Coppola, or something outside of those 4. And if so, why?
I think, okay, guys, I don't really like the Godfather movies that much. I'm sorry. I'm a girl and I'm not interested in mob movies. I'm sorry. I respect them, but I don't enjoy them. So
you mean you don't identify with like an extremely oppressive patriarchy? What?
It's not. I'm sorry, but
Well put.
Just going to put that out there. So that's out. I love the conversation. No, I think the conversation is probably my favorite Coppola. But
yes,
I have to say, Bram Stoker's Dracula is dope. That movie is crazy. I love it. It's like, it's over the top and insane in a big swing. And like some stuff just doesn't work at all. But like the stuff that does work is incredible. And the mood of that movie, oh my gosh. I saw that movie. That movie took me 3 views before I was like, this is a masterpiece. The first 2 times it didn't click in for me and it wasn't working. And then the third time I was like, I would watch this movie every day now. I love it.
That's fascinating.
So that's my vote for Coppola.
What would you say, Robert?
What's your vote? I'll tell you, it's funny that you mentioned that because I felt that way about The Godfather when I first saw it. I was like, what the hell is this like slow movie about a bunch of jerks? Like, I don't like these people. Like, these people are bad.
Yeah.
And as I watched the movie more, the intrigue and the specifics of, you know, everyone's arc, you know, everyone's story and the struggles that people like Michael and even his father had. And, you know, even though these people are terrible people, the struggles that they went through are very human struggles. And they speak to like, you know, again, like the sort of classic Greek tropes and, you know, all the things that really good filmmaking utilizes as common themes. However, so I love the shit out of the Godfather films, and I love Apocalypse Now, but Conversation is definitely my favorite, like by far. Yeah, for so many reasons. I want to say one thing though, really quick. So everybody, there's kind of a commonly understood notion that that era of filmmaking for Coppola is kind of his golden age. Because a lot of the stuff that happens after, like in the 80s and 90s, is like you're saying, very different, right? Like the subject matter is different. But even down to like, I'll take like Stanley Kubrick, for instance, he's known for certain kinds of shots, for certain kinds of moods, certain kinds of subject matter. You know, he's a very distinct, extreme example of a distinct style in directorial style. Coppola was that way with his first 4 films. After that, he uses a lot of darkness as he frames his subjects partially obscured by things from a distance. There's a lot of very distinct stylistic elements in how he shoots things. After Apocalypse Now, it all kind of just like goes out the window. And I've always wondered that because for me personally, like I from a craft standpoint, I both enjoy his earlier films, but I also appreciate the fact that he was trying to branch out later on and try new things and like expand himself as an artist. But I mean, the thing is that like any director of merit could have done half of his later filmography and it would have been fine.
Yeah, that's a really good point as a mark against the later filmography.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So 2 votes for Conversation. Okay. So I'm going to be the basic and
you're going to be the contrarian.
I'm going to go for The Godfather. I do think that The Godfather is a masterpiece. And it for me, the reason The Godfather wins is because of that first 20-minute sequence
at the wedding. Yeah.
It really is. I don't think there are many scenes in movies that beat that sequence. It introduces every character. It introduces every theme that's about to go down in this movie. And it's so effortless. And I could watch it any day, anytime. And it's such a basic and obvious thing to say, but I have to admit it is true. I will say though, Conversation, very high for me. I will also say, to your point, Laura, Dracula, very high for me. A very cool movie.
It was incredible.
It's a really worth, if you haven't seen it recently, it's worth like rewatching. It's sort of an amazing overlooked movie. I think it got a lot of shit because of the Keanu Reeves stuff. And the Winona Ryder, them feeling out of place, but I
think Winona Ryder's fine. Keanu Reeves just doesn't belong in the past. He just feels so modern.
He's too modern, but there's a lot about that movie that is playing around with theatricality and gothic imagery in a way that is very, very it's the kind of thing where you have a very mature director making very deliberate decisions that a younger director would not have made because it's just a little too on the edge of cheesiness, but he goes for it and it just totally works. I will say one more is I really liked Peggy Sue Got Married. I actually think of the...
It's a fun movie.
Yeah, I think of the 80s Coppolas, it's my favorite. And
you love Nick Cage in it?
I like Cage in it a lot.
You love the
Nick
voice?
Cage is in it.
I do
Let's
love
be real.
Cage. I also
It's
like
Nick
that
Cage.
it's a kind of weird time travel movie. And like, I couldn't quite figure out the metaphysics of the time travel. It's very strange. It's basically like she has like an out of body time travel experience. But like, if she's inhabiting her earlier self's body, what's her earlier self doing? Is her earlier self just like somewhere else? Is she just like chilling out in the noumenal realm?
That's like Zemeckis territory. It doesn't have to make sense.
Yeah, I know. But in my letterbox review, I like detail all, what could possibly be happening argument. In that movie. But I kind of dig it.
What do you think is happening?
What do I don't know. No, we don't need to go into it now.
Oh my God, we don't have time.
We don't have time. But it's a cool movie, and so Coppola, fun director. The Conversation, amazing movie. I think we all agree. And Robert, thank you very much for spending so much time with us to talk about
thank you
these movies.
Thank both of you. I really appreciate you inviting me on here and geeking the fuck out.
We could not have asked for a better expert and tour guide to this movie.
Absolutely. And you're welcome back anytime. Let me know if there are other things you want to talk about. So we are at CowsPod on Twitter. You can find us on the web at cowspod.wordpress.com. If you enjoyed the episode and you've been enjoying any of our episodes, please go on Apple Podcasts and drop a rating and a review if you like. These things weirdly help as far as making the podcast seem like it's legitimate and not just two random people in their basement making a podcast that nobody's listening to. And, our goal for 2021 is for this podcast to continue and to not be a random act of two people in their basement with crappy audio equipment recording weird takes on movies, but rather something that people might want to listen to. So
here to that.
Cheers.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much. And thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Robert.
And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.